Good morning, grand risings. Welcome to Wake Up with Sonia Poulton. And guess it is exactly 9 a.m. GMT. And thank you for being here with me and the crew, the family in the house. Really wonderful to have them here, all alive and kicking. And we have Sass1 and James and Woken Flower and London Lady and Michelle. And of course, our lovely soul sound, our Mod and Katie and Catherine and Merv and Randy and Sean and Jackie. Did I already say Jackie? And Eric. And did I already say London Lady? I'm getting confused now. And Armand and on. And Cheryl and Colin and John from Coventry, who isn't feeling very well. Get well soon, John, you little darling. And Aqua Boy and Shalini and Teresa and you name it. Everybody's in the house. It's lovely to see you all. Good morning, Grand Risings, and we are here. Episode 54, and we are rising to the challenge twice a week and building our own army at breakfast. Oh, yes, we are. Welcome to the show that understands an angry man will defeat himself in life as well as in battle, and we intend to be nothing but Zen. How are you? Crazy Bunny, our other mod, is not here with us today, but between Soul Sound and I, we will keep order. Oh, yes, we will. So play nice, or you'll be put in timeout or even ejected. Oh, yes, we're not messing around here. And hello to lovely Teresa Wild in the comments. This week, she said she thought she would share the words of Mother Teresa with us. And I know that Mother Teresa had many, many critics, but she also had many people who admired what she did. And Teresa said that she's used the words of Mother Teresa many times in her life. And I'm just going to briefly quote it. I'm not going to read the whole quote. And that is, life is an opportunity. Benefit from it. Life is beauty. Admire it. Life is bliss. Taste it. Life is a dream. Realize it. Life is a challenge. Meet it. Life is an adventure. Dare it. Oh, yes, right here and now. Let me tell you what's coming up. I'm going to be reunited with my ex-working buddy, Gemma Cooper, journalist Gemma Cooper, who will be going in deep on the so-named, or so-called rather, assisted dying bill. That's not actually its official name. Wait till you hear what it is. And I'll also be joined by SUNIL SHARMA, media commentator, who will be doing the lowdown on Ukraine, Russia, migration, farming, and the climate change hypocrisy, because that's what it is, right? And then our final guest will be author and academic Dr. David Hughes. He'll be talking through his work from the crimes of the deep state to the judgment of Richard D. Hall. All of this, including, very sadly, Peter Lynch's funeral, the Arla Cow Backlash. Sophie said in the comments earlier, morning, Sonia, not a liver, but a catcher-upper here. I've just heard about Bovaer being given to cows to reduce methane. Have you heard about this? Oh, yes, I have. Oh, yes, I have, which is why we're going to be covering it. And I'll also be looking at why has Martin Frizzell finally left this morning. Martin Frizzell is a man behind many, many official narratives, including the abduction of Madeleine McCann. We'll be looking at this whole rumour that's going around about London webcams being off. I spent a couple of hours yesterday researching this and going through it and double checking and checking, and I will reveal the results of that a bit later on. We'll also, of course, have our Geoengineering Watch, our small business spotlight, because I think it's really important to highlight businesses with integrity who stand up to be counted. I will check in on a BlackRock lawsuit. That sounds good. And also starting a new feature, Heroes Without Statues. And we'll end with thank you, Adversaries, because they do play a blooming good role, believe it or not. Plus all the usual good stuff, viewer emails and live chat. We do news differently around here. And you know why? Because someone had to. Of course, I'm sure you've heard about Australia now passing a social media ban for under 16s. The law will make social media platforms liable for fines of up to 50 million Australian dollars, which is about 25 million pounds sterling. And that's if they don't automatically stop children younger than 16 from holding accounts. Well, I'm sure many people, I mean, I know I'm not alone in believing that there should be an actual digital age of consent for children, because there's so much we don't know about what goes on the internet and the long-term impact on children. But of course, they were always going to use children to get the rest of us, right? That's what they were going to do. So I have very mixed feelings about all of that, but I'm sure our commenters will not have mixed feelings. Oh no. And I noticed that the Curly Crew asked in the comments earlier about these respect orders. Now, so basically it's an updated and even more punishing version of an ASBO, an antisocial behaviour order. It gives the police increased powers to arrest people and seize goods, including vehicles and phones, without having to issue a warning. And so these new respect orders, they were actually promised in Labour's general election manifesto. They'll be introduced as part of an upcoming crime and policing bill. The government said they would partially replace existing civil injunction powers with a wider range of penalties. We're so shocked, aren't we? We're so shocked that a former DPP who is now PM is so damn punishing. And it says offenders could also be forced to attend drug or alcohol treatment services or anger management courses. Well, we're all angry. They're winding us up. They're provoking us. They're making us angry. And but Curly Crew, I can't see how that actually affects petitions, because one of the things that the Curly Crew was saying in the comments was, is this going to impact petitions like, for example, the current petition that's going around to call for another general election, which I haven't actually looked at this morning, but yesterday was closing in on 3 million signatures. Goodness me, imagine 3 million of us on the street. Wouldn't that be something? So Curly Crew, I don't know how that affects petitions. And can I just say a big, massive shout out to the truth community at the Red Lion in Stansted Abbots, where I was on Tuesday giving a talk. What a fantastic night. We are an amazing tribe out there. I met a whole bunch of interesting people, as we do when we reach out to other truth seekers. And I was told stories involving all manner of people, from Cliff Richard to fake history sites. And I want to say a big thank you to everyone involved in organising it and everyone who came. We were packed. We were absolutely packed. And it was the most incredible vibe. There I am, getting ready to talk. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you to the lovely, lovely Helen for linking me up with the Red Lion organisers, and also for being a wonderful human being that you are. Helen is just so cute. Everybody, you have to meet her one day. She looks like a doll in all the right ways, Helen, in all the right ways. If I ever needed a personal shopper, Helen would be in the running for it. She gifted me 3 absolutely wonderful items. She's such a generous individual. And one of them is this magnificent rosehip oil hand balm, which I'm going to be using throughout the show because it's fabulous and it smells divine, and it ticks all the right boxes for me, cruelty free, etc., etc. And I love it, and I love her. Thank you, Ellen, you're an angel. As is lovely Josie, who is organising all these wonderful events at the Red Lion. She's an amazing individual. And thank you for all the people who came. And can I just say, people, are you ready? Are you ready? We have mugs. We have mugs. We have mugs. Look. Question the narrative. And this was organised by the truly fabulous Susanna and Mark. Again, wonderful people. There are so many wonderful people out there, truly. And the thing is, we've been told for the longest time that if you are alternative thinkers, or you dare to step away from the official narrative, that you are lonely, that you are isolated, that there's not many of you. They've been lying to us. I know you're shocked to hear that. There are many of us. There are many of us. We are not the few. Oh, no. And we are growing in number. We know that since 2020. We are growing in number big time. So thank you so much to everybody who made Tuesday night possible. And thank you for everybody who came. What a brilliant night. Brilliant exchange of views. We also did a Q&A, and that was brilliant. And Dan Stevens, who's been on with us before here talking about geoengineering, was also there. And he came up for a brief time and we talked briefly about geoengineering, but it was a fantastic night and I loved it. And the thing is that there has been such a long-term attack on pubs. It still continues. And I made a comment on social media about it, and Which End responded with a meme. And it said how the seeds of the revolution were planted. We met in taverns, we met in restaurants, we met in churches. Understand the closures now? Oh, yes. We need to support our local communities. We need to support our local pubs. Yes, we do. And a big up to the man on the counter 8 at LNER just before 3 p.m. on Tuesday. I love it when companies don't act like corporations. My first train from where I live was cancelled. The second one was delayed. I got to King's Cross late. I missed my train. It was a non-exchangeable ticket, and a wonderful man at counter 8 gave me a fresh ticket without me having to repurchase. How kind is that? He booked me on the next train. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. Yes, I do. And just to say, before we bring in our first guest, congratulations, Jennifer Garrett. Jennifer Garrett won Rosie Maria's book. Rosie Maria Love's book, which I don't have on the table anymore, but Rosie Maria, of course, was with us on Monday. And Jennifer is the winner. Thank you all for entering. Truly, truly appreciate it. Right, we're going to bring in our first guest. And she's a goodie. She's somebody I know well. She is. Hello, Gemma Cooper.
Hello there, Sonia. What a lovely story. Just listening to that about your travels on Tuesday to go to the Red Lion, and the person who, in the train station, I reckon he knew who you were. I reckon he thought, there's a fellow freedom fighter. I'll do my bit for the revolution. But yeah, heartening. And what is really heartening is what you've just said, which is so encouraging, is that, there are so many of us out there. And, I've gone through my own ups and downs since we last worked together on TNT, which is sadly no longer with us, that particular TV station. I'm thinking, am I on my own? Maybe I've got this all wrong. I still doubt myself sometimes, but no, then I hear you and I think, no, we've got this. We were right. And the story that I'm going to talk about today proves even more, I think, how right we have been over the last 5 years and what it's really been about.
Absolutely. Now, if anybody out there is not familiar with Gemma, as Gemma said, we first met working together at TNT. And honestly, I have to say, Gem, this is absolutely the truth. And that is the highlight of my morning. I did 5 days a week, was Gemma joining me. And it was absolutely brilliant. And she joined me and she was always absolutely on top of the news. And that's why Gemma is absolutely the right and perfect person to be discussing what she's discussing today. But just a little bit of background. First of all, Gemma is a former BBC journalist and she saw through the misinformation. She attended the protests and she departed the BBC at 2021. Of course, mainstream media came after her because they would. But she's been an absolute stalwart. And she's worked in alternative media over the last 4 years. She's worked with Iconic. She's worked with the World Council for Health. As I say, we worked together at TNT and she's here today. And Jem, when I announced on social media last night that you were joining us today, the amount of comments that was like, oh, at last you're reunited. Absolutely. Thank you for being here. And yes, whoop, she's here, people. She's here. Our Gemma is here. Good morning, all, says people in the comments. Right. So you are, of course, here to talk about, it's kind of commonly known, isn't it, as the assisted dying bill, but it's actually the terminally ill adults end of life bill. It's getting its second reading in Parliament today. It's headed up by MP Kim Ledbetter. And many of her opponents say that she's failed to grasp the real issues surrounding this bill. And you can see why, because she has suggested that fearing being a burden could be a legitimate reason to seek an assisted death. So, Gemma, I want you to take it away, lay the ground for us. Tell us your thoughts about this.
Well, it's an extraordinary bill. It's a private member's bill. It's not actually been brought by the government. It's been brought as a private member's bill by Kim Ledbetter. Of course, she's the sister of Jo Cox, the MP that was, killed over Brexit. Allegedly, there are kind of a whole lot of theories about Jo Cox's death. We won't go into them here. And the bill kicks off, the debate kicks off at 9:30. It has polarized the Commons. And what is interesting is the parallels I'm going to draw down between what we saw in 2020 onwards in terms of messaging that the public was being given and the messaging which has come out surrounding this. Now, like you, Sonia, I'm a journalist and I'm very interested in language and words and how they are used. But also I'm training to be a psychotherapist and that'll be a new career for me. And I'm very interested in the human psyche and how it easily manipulated it is. And what is extraordinary is the messaging that's coming from the pro-dying camp, the pro-assisted dying, this very shadowy group called Dignity in Dying and its sister group Compassion in Dying, which are responsible for these big ads that we've seen on the London Underground. And the messaging surrounding the ads for pro-assisted dying are exactly the same as the messaging we saw around the vaccines. The language that's used in these posters is, my dying wish is that I don't want my family to see me suffer, and I won't have to. Now, the inference there, of course, is, you're doing it for other people. You're killing yourself so you don't upset your family. Other people are more important than you. Exactly the same messaging we saw around the vaccines, which was, protect other people, protect your granny, protect others. Other people are more important than you. With this kind of programming that we've all got, which we get in school, which is we're nothing. We're worthless. The ego says you're nothing. You're a nobody. You're worth nothing. You're effectively self-hating yourself, and everything is about other people. So this very coercive messaging, and of course, what you just said about not being a burden on the NHS, again, the same messaging. Protect the NHS by killing yourself. Exactly the same. Don't go into a hospital in 2020. Protect the NHS, the sacred NHS. It's all exactly the same. The messaging surrounding this bill, for those who are supporting the bill, is protect the NHS and do it for other people. And you yourself are worth nothing. And it seems the public once again are falling for it. I've watched all the polls. A straw poll carried out by the I newspaper this morning shows 60% in favour, or 54% in favour this morning. A poll carried out by the Times and the Sunday Times, 60% of people are in favour, the public, of this bill. So it seems the messaging has really got into people's psyches, just like 5 years ago. What it means as well, of course, is there is a significant chunk of the public, I think about 20%, who are against the bill. And it'll be very interesting to see the 160 plus MPs that are going to stand up in this 5-hour debate this morning and see how it has split the Commons. We have got obviously all the religious groups in the UK dead against this, and I can see why they're doing that. And this is the topic we're going to go into in a bit more detail, which is about the ego versus the soul, and at what point the soul leaves the body. The choice really shouldn't come from the ego, the conscious self. It should come from the soul and the soul's journey. But we can drill down into that. I know that not everyone will agree with me on that, but that's what this show is for, isn't it? It's free speech. Let's have a conversation.
Absolutely. And what I'm interested in as well, Gemma, is who is for it and who is against it. And one of the people that you mentioned to me yesterday was David Cameron. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, David Cameron, obviously a former prime minister, he's not an MP, so he won't have a vote on this. But he's a bit of an anomaly, because a lot of the other former prime ministers, Theresa May, Gordon Brown, Liz Truss, they've all come out against this bill. David Cameron was previously against it, saying it was open to manipulation and it would encourage people to be coerced into taking their own lives. But only yesterday, well, the day before, actually, he's come out and he's suddenly changed his mind. And you think, how has he been got to? He had such a staunch position on it. He was always against it, and then suddenly he's for it. It'd be interesting to know why that is, how that was. And there's been a lot of lobbying. This group, Dignity in Dying, nobody's really sure what they're about, where they get their money from. There's been a lot of conversation about the funding that's come from them, a £300,000 donation that's linked to an offshore account, which is allegedly linked to the Panama Papers. No one really knows who's funding them. Apparently links to the Soros Foundation. So again, they're getting the loudest voice. They're the ones with all the ads on the underground. But yeah, Cameron suddenly doing a U-turn. I was quite surprised at that, but he won't have a vote. But of course, he's quite an influential person.
So, of course, the bill has been proposed, as you say, by, very sadly, a former MP who's now dead, her sister, Kim Ledbetter. Kim Ledbetter, by the way, very interesting. I don't know if you realise this, Gemma, but when Keir Starmer entered the Commons as Prime Minister, his maiden speech was in part dedicated to Kim Ledbetter and the family, which is really interesting. So she, of course, is at the helm of this bill. But there are other very influential people, such as, for example, Esther Rantzen. What do you think about these people who are involved? And because Esther Rantzen had got Keir Starmer apparently to promise to have this debate, it all feels very rushed, doesn't it? But what is your thought about famous people like Esther Rantzen getting involved?
Well, I mean, as a former BBC person for 20 years plus, Esther Rantzen is a deeply shady character in herself. She did know about Jimmy Savile. Interesting, there's another BBC presenter in the headlines this morning. Questions about conduct, going back years in the workplace, sexual conduct. The BBC is, there's just going to be more of this coming now. We're in the end times where everything's being revealed. But Esther Rantzen absolutely did know about Jimmy Savile and didn't raise the alarm. And of course, she founded Childline, which you and I have discussed
just
before.
To say, of course, she said that she only heard about it in green rooms and that everybody else heard about it as well. I just have to bring that balance, because we all know what libel laws are like. But I take your point. It has been admitted that she had heard all the rumors, right?
Yes, absolutely. She had heard all the rumors, like many, and did nothing, like many. That is actually, you know, common knowledge. And
Yeah.
of course, founded Childline, and there are questions about Childline. That's real purpose about that. People can go off and research that for themselves. But yes, what is interesting is why Kim Ledbetter. Actually, I would like to sit down with her and ask her why. Why have you brought this in? And it's been very rushed. The public, although they're in support of this, have said it is rushed. It is a private members bill. It hasn't got the scrutiny that it needs with the abuse that it's open to. But she's brought this in, and this is the clangor for me. She's brought it in under the guise of body autonomy, my body, my choice. Well, where was that messaging 5 years ago? Body
Right.
autonomy. We didn't have any body autonomy, did we? It was basically
No.
the opposite messaging. So
And she was also part of that whole thing of, you know, ostracize people who were questioning the jabs from society, wasn't she? So she wasn't at all about bodily autonomy then. So how interesting, how curious. The comments are flooding in. Gemma, you are triggering all manner of things, which is absolutely wonderful. We love that. Right, Gem, let me just ask you about this, right? So obviously, Esther Ranson, Kim Ledbetter, all leading this. You've talked about the sort of intrigue around dignity in dying. Obviously, huge amount of money that has been spent on advertising. We know a minimum of £660,000 on advertising, huge volume of money. So that's really interesting as well. But also, I want to talk a little bit about the kind of coercive control as well from your perspective, because you are absolutely brilliant at understanding this. It does feel, doesn't it, that we're all under a great deal of pressure. And those figures that you quoted earlier, that's quite shocking. You're sort of saying only 20% at this moment are like opposing it.
Well, you know, these are polls that are being presented to us by the mainstream media and saying that 60% of the general public, especially the over 55s and especially the over 60s, are absolutely in favour of this bill, but they don't want it rushed through. They want it given proper scrutiny. Now, is that gaslighting? Is that people, you know, made up poll or a selective part of the population who they already know are going to support this bill? But the messaging is very clear. Kill yourself. The messaging is absolutely kill yourself for other people. Makes you a good person. Everyone will think really well of you if you bump yourself off. That's absolutely the messaging. And that's the messaging that worked so well 5 years ago with the nudge units and all of the psychology that was brought in to make you feel that you were a good person. And also the messaging over the last 5 years surrounding the vaccines was, and the behavior was to eliminate all risk, stay safe. Stay safe. Don't risk going out of your house. Don't risk touching the supermarket shopping. Wipe it down. Don't handle money. Stay safe. Don't go to the pub. Don't look at anyone. Don't breathe. Stay safe. Eliminate risk. And the messaging here is eliminate suffering. And that's an argument that's being pushed. No, nobody wants to suffer at the end of their life. There are many ways you can alleviate suffering, but alleviate suffering by killing yourself. Eliminate suffering. Don't suffer. Don't suffer. You know, it's the same thing. Suffering and risk are part of life. And so there's the messaging again. Just die. Just die. Don't live. Don't live. And you have to broaden that out and say, why is this pro-death cult, this pro-death messaging so prevalent and really pervasive, you know, on the underground of all places where people do kill themselves, you know, ask any train driver, but it's really, really being hammered in, kill yourself, you're not worth anything. Think of other people. And it's really quite shocking. And the other messaging surrounding this, well, it's not really the messaging. It is appealing very much to the ego, the small part of you.
This is where I wanted to get to. Go for it.
Very, very concerned, the ego, with what other people think. It's entire kind of reason for being is to, how will this make me look and what will other people think of me? This messaging is appealing to the ego. So your conscious self will decide, right, I'm gonna kill myself Friday afternoon, 12 o'clock. I've got all the doctors to sign it. I've got the High Court judge. He signed it off, which is part of this bill. I'm going to do it. Well, actually, if you really broaden this out, this is where we're going with this. I'm just going to throw in a quote. When I used to have heroes, in a time before I realized, you know, the only hero in my own life should be myself, one of my heroes was Prince. And he was definitely awake. He took on the corporations. He changed his identity from his straw man to a symbol so the corporations couldn't control him. He was very awake, and he died in quite strange circumstances. Now, he did a quote once, and it stuck with me. He said, what people have got to realize is there is a war on. And the battle is for the human mind, and the prize is the soul. And that's where we are with this messaging. The ego should have no place. And I've studied near-death experiences. I'm training to be a psychotherapist. There are many, many schools of thought, and it's not just me, that says the ego does not decide when death comes. It's a soul choice. The soul comes here with a soul contract and a purpose and a reason for being. And people who've had near-death experiences come back, and the common thread is you see how your life is connected to every other single human being on the planet. We're all connected, this one consciousness, and you have a role to play. And it's the soul's journey. The ego should never decide the time of death. The soul departs when the soul has completed its life purpose on earth and goes back into the creative source. So this is getting in the way of the divine blueprint, the plan, if you want to call it God, the universe, creation, whatever. It's not for the ego to decide. It's interrupting a divine process. And isn't it funny, Sonia, in one generation, we have destroyed the sacred masculine, the sacred feminine. We've got people chopping off their reproductive organs. Again, part of the creative plan for the humanity. And we're telling the ego, you can decide your soul's journey. No, it's all wrong. It's inverted, and it's deeply, deeply disturbing. And that's what I believe is behind all of this messaging, telling people to kill themselves, which is, it'd be very interesting to see. I really hope this bill doesn't get voted today and have a second reading in April. We'll have to see. But that's where I think we are with this. It's something much, much bigger than just a piece of legislation.
You're having the same impact on our viewers as you had on me, and that is Good Ship Lollipop says, oh, I got shivers. And that is the fact, because you're talking about really real stuff now. You're actually talking about men and women interfering with the process of who we are and what we're about. And that cannot ever be okay. Craig says they are taking away our purpose, and that the pressure on us is huge and intense. Do you think this is going to go through to the next stage today, Gemma? I've got an awful feeling it will.
I don't know. I think a lot of people who are going to be voting today have said that they are not in favor. Now, whether that translates into the vote, whether they want to keep in step with what is being presented to us as public opinion, is it? We all know how the mainstream media was captured and bought during the 2020 years. So is it really public opinion? The anti-dying lobby hasn't had a big voice. It hasn't had the money thrown at it that the pro-dying lobby has. There is a rally outside the Commons, probably getting underway now, actually, from disability groups who are absolutely against this.
You can see why.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, this is the other thing, of course, absolutely, which is what you've also reflected on, is the fact that we've had the last 4 to 5 years to see what the people in charge are really like and what they'll do with us when our lives are in their hands. They cannot be trusted. Absolutely they can't. And sick and disabled people have had at least the last decade, from Cameron's government to present, where vulnerable people are constantly getting a kick in. You can see why they'd be in uproar, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And they'll be very vocal this morning outside Parliament. But it's a free vote. So, of course, it has to be a free vote. There can't be a party whip on. Well, it's a private member. There's a private members bill, so there can't be a party whip. But who is going to do that whip and say? A whip is like telling your members how to vote, effectively, and say, we're in favour of killing people. And it's just, I wouldn't want to, but they want to be in step with what they think is public opinion. But I'm very dubious about these polls, whether they're accurate or not, or whether they're being presented to us. Again, you don't agree with everybody else. You don't agree, ending suffering. It's not about that. It is about this uprising in spiritual consciousness that has been sweeping the planet pre-2020, but 2020 accelerated it. This is a moment in time in human evolution that's been foretold in many astrology transits, the Mayan calendar, the transition of the ages, the precession of the equinoxes. This is a pivotal moment in human evolution. And the shadowy elites behind the scenes who are very into astrology and magic, they know this, and they're trying to clamp down. And clearly something to do with the soul and the soul's uprising and the soul's wanting the soul to take the driving seat now. I think that's why so many people knew there was something deeply off 2020 onwards. It was the soul, your intuition, your inner tutor telling you this ain't right. This ain't right. Not just in a 3D level, but on a 5D level. This ain't right. And this is reflective of that uprising in consciousness and how they want to stamp out the soul, stamp out the soul's purpose, ready for transhumanism, possibly.
Exactly. You struck such a deep nerve with our viewers, as I knew you would. Aurora Storm says, my dad is currently dying at home. Sorry to hear that, Aurora. It's not a burden to care for him. As he dies, his family see this as love and the right thing to do. And, the thing is that, Gemma, you've brilliantly outlined the fact that we are dealing with coercive control. We're dealing with narcissists in power, sociopaths, psychopaths, you name it. This is almost a replay of where we've just come from through the whole of C19. You've all touched us very, very deeply. It's been such a pleasure to have you with us. Tell us, right? So obviously we're going to be keeping an eye on that, what goes on in Parliament today. But let us end on something much more positive. What are you doing this weekend, Gemma?
Well, yes, I'd almost forgotten, actually. Me and my good friend Mark Devlin. Mark's doing a series of talks in Devon. It's Sidmouth tonight, Barnstable tomorrow, and then Marston Magna near Yeovil on Sunday afternoon. It's all on his website. So we're really good friends. We've known each other for years. And so we're doing a bit of a road trip down into Devon. He's going to be doing talks on all kinds of things, mind control in James Bond movies and all kinds of stuff. I'm sure many people are familiar with Mark. So yeah, we're going down to Devon, going to meet people in the truther community, remind ourselves we're not alone, and hopefully get in a few nice beach walks as well.
Wonderful to have you with us. You have to come back again soon. Obviously, you and I have got plans moving forward into the new year. Everybody, if you're not familiar with her, although lots of people in the comments absolutely are, we will put a link, by the way, to Mark Devlin's shows this weekend in the description. But this is the remarkable Gemma Cooper, and it's been wonderful to have her back with us again. Have a wonderful weekend, Gemma. Thank you very much for that. I mean, just so insightful. Look, as I said, when I thought we have to obviously cover it, we covered it on Monday with Dr. Janine Morgan, and I thought we have to cover it again. And I literally thought there was nobody better than you, because you just are able to see the big picture and join all those dots, right? From very earthly ways to something far, far beyond that. Everybody, this is Gemma Cooper, and aren't we lucky to have her? Take good care of yourself, Gem. Have a lovely weekend, darling.
Thank you, Sonia.
Lovely to have her with us. Isn't it wonderful to be reunited? Yes, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. Well, that got you all going, didn't it? Yes, it did. Bye, Gemma. Love to you, says Judith Harris. Gemma, star, says Heal in the Silence. Crafty Kim. Great, Sonia Poulton. Is it Gemma or Gemma? It's JEMMA, Soul Sound. That's who it is. And Jonathan said, I didn't have much of a view of this subject. It never sat well with me. That is until you put the opposing side's argument so beautifully and to the point. Exactly. There are nefarious things with this bill. Gemma has just turned Jonathan, which is fantastic, because there's something wrong with it. The thing is, I used to be very divided about it, because I was like, if I ever got into that situation, terminal illness, I wouldn't necessarily want to carry on. But when I start to see all the shady characters involved and how much money is involved in this, it's just like, no, okay, I know which way I have to come down on right now. And that is, I cannot possibly support it. And then when I hear that Matt Hancock, who was the health secretary during C19, is supporting it, well, that's it for me. I'm done and dusted on that. Right. I want to bring in our next guest because, well, he has so much to talk about with us. Here he is. Good morning. It's SUNIL Sharma. How are you, SUNIL?
Morning, Sonia. I'm good. How are you?
Great to have you with us. Thank you. Well, obviously, we've just kicked off to a very lively start with Gemma Cooper, really important about the whole assisted dying bill. And you're going to be tackling a whole raft of topics for us, rather. So I start wherever you like to, because the thing about around here, SUNIL, is I like people to be in their element, where they're most passionate, what it is that makes them, angry or inspired or whatever. Talk to me. What's making you angry, inspired, or passionate this morning?
I want to start with Gemma's point there. Like, I thought the suffering thing was such a good, the way she described that. And I actually think that is a bit of our sort of generation problem, in terms of we have no capacity to suffer. So I think it's a real serious issue. I think even with younger people, but just generally, I know each generation will say people are getting softer and weaker, and people post-war would say, to their kids, you didn't live through wars, you're soft or whatever. And I think that's always been a thing. But I think it's now coming to a point where the tolerance for pain and suffering for us as in the West in particular is so poor, it's so low, But I think it's now actually harming our day-to-day lives, and I think it's actually harming us as a country. And I think you can kind of see that with the Labour government, and even the previous government, that the softness of this nature, I think, is really worrying. And I think Jem put it really well with the dying bill. But I think that's a really, really good point. But the thing that's, if you like, that's grinding my gears recently is the what's going on in Russia, Ukraine. I mean, it's gone on for now more than 2 years, and it seems like the coverage we've got is really, in my opinion, really poor in terms of what's going on there. And I think with the news that now Biden is allowing the long distance air strikes into now Russia, it seems like I've almost come to the conclusion that he wants to keep this war going rather than trying it to stop. And I think that's deeply concerning.
Who do you feel wants to keep the war going?
I think the Democratic Party for sure. I think there's people, even just generally, maybe even the UK, the West. I think there is look, I think the history of this war is really complicated. It's not necessarily black and white in terms of
exactly.
Putin is this madman, crazy Hitler-esque person, which I think is really unfair. I'm not saying he's the good guy. I don't think he is, but there is a lot more to unpack in this whole in this whole dilemma. So I actually want to go through. I've made a few notes to make sure I don't miss out the timeline of these events. But I think that this war started in 1990. I think when Germany, when I say we, I mean the West, America, and us, when we decided that we want Germany unified, rightly so, the West and East Germany back together. We spoke with Gorbachev, and it was very clear. James Baker, at the time Secretary of State, said it quite clearly. We will not move an inch. NATO will not move an inch towards Russia. It will not move. We will, we'll unify as long as you agree to unify the country. Germany, we, as an agreement, will not go anywhere closer to your country in terms of NATO expanding. Gorbachev said, great, that's what we want. It's important that you don't expand towards us. Let's unify Germany now. Done. Okay, great. That changed 4 years later. Clinton made it clear that he had plans to NATO to aggressively expand. And years later, 1999, we saw 3 countries, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, all join NATO. Again, this is a direct change from what we said in 1990, where we said we would not grow an inch towards NATO. We grew towards NATO here in these 3 countries. Again, Russia at this point aren't incensed. They're not too annoyed. They're more annoyed with what's going on in Serbia in terms of we've got involved in a war in Serbia, again, America with the 78 days of bombing in Serbia, and they're more annoyed about that. But anyway, Putin comes to power, and Putin starts off as this pro-European, pro-American leader of Russia. He even talks about joining NATO, which obviously we don't come anywhere near close up. But 9/11 happens, Afghanistan happens, and he again supports us. He says, there's a war on terror. Let's wipe this out. We're on the same page. Changes again, and I think that this is, the big change, which is really missed out, and a lot of this is 2002, when the US walk out the anti-ballistic missile agreement, the treaty essentially, which meant now America could put missiles that could go into Moscow within 3 minutes, 4 minutes. They can now put some of these missiles in countries around Russia. Russia say, look, this seems like a threat. The US say, no, it's not. It's just, we're safeguarding, and it's a defense mechanism. And Russia say, no, I think this is a bit of a threat. You're putting missiles that could come to our country in a very short space of time. Then 2004 happens, and we see Estonia, Lithuania, in total 7 more countries join NATO. We, again, going back to the 1990 promise we made of not growing NATO an inch towards them, we've now got 7 more countries that have joined NATO. Again, going against the thing. Then we go into Ukraine, where the first so-called color revolution, where we are actively, as in US, are actively involved in a regime change, a soft regime change, in terms of we actively take out. We put Yushchenko in, and then we basically say this is, we want more pro-NATO, pro-Western influence in Ukraine. That changes in 2009, when Yanukovych comes into power, and Yanukovych says he wins on neutrality, where he says, look, my country's divided. I don't think most of the country doesn't really want to go in NATO. Half it's ethnic Ukrainian, half it's ethnic Russian. And he kind of wins on the basis of neutrality, because he's essentially saying, I want to keep both parties happy. Let's leave it at that. that's not enough for the US. So we do another regime change in 2014. So we changed that, and it's all documented. The US ambassador talks to Victoria Nuland about it, where she says, we should actually, they actively give out names in terms of who they think the next president of Ukraine should be. And they even say that we can get Biden on a plane, at the time vice president, to basically, give this new leader a pat on the back and to get him, that sort of media attention. At this point, Putin is quite angry and quite incensed, and he's saying that you are clearly trying to expand NATO. This has to stop. And anyway, I think this sort of stuff carries on. And I think then we go into the real nitty-gritty of when this war really kicks off. And that's, I think, 15th December 2021, where Putin drafts an agreement. Zelensky agrees with this agreement, which is essentially the West will now sign an agreement that says you will not go towards NATO. You will not grow any more, expand in NATO. You've expanded already. Okay, it's happened. But from now onwards, at no point will there be any more expansion. Let's get it in writing. And this war with Ukraine, this conflict with Ukraine stops. We don't sign this agreement. America come out and say, well, we don't want to expand NATO. We don't want to expand, but we're not going to sign an agreement. And they then go as far as saying NATO is an open door policy. Now, my opinion, and it may be different, I think when you're putting foreign missiles in countries, when you're putting your own missiles, in foreign countries, it's really you need a lot of diplomacy to think about this, because you've got neighboring countries to think about. You've got to think about. It's not as simple as, I can put my rocket and I can put my missile in a random country, because there's implications around. We don't know what's going on in those areas. So I think we should always really proceed with a lot of caution when we're doing that. And I think, again, the West has played a really poor role in this war, and I think this isn't a defense of Putin. I think it's more of an attack on us and what we, as in America in particular, have done really poorly in the last 20-30 years in terms of where we are with this conflict. And I think we need to kind of accept some responsibility in what's going on in that country, because innocent Ukrainians and Russians are dying right now. And I think, regardless of where we politically or what do we think on this, I think most people would agree that we want it to stop ASAP.
Absolutely. And thank you for that excellent summary. But here's the thing. What can we ultimately do, though? Because we have our statesmen, quote unquote, offering, billions a year for this, America's proxy war. How can we stop that? I mean, are we ultimately responsible? It's our money that's being used, but we have no say in it.
I think I'm more happy to see with Trump becoming the president of US in terms of that potentially making a change. I think RFK Jr., who's one of the people in his administration, I think that's a wonderful appointment. I think somebody like that who is rational, who asks these questions, he's been asking them for a long time, the impact of war. I think having more people like that in positions of power who are going to ask these sort of questions and look through the history, and I think that's really important. I think that's where the change will come, and I think it's making it clear to these politicians here in the UK and in America that the focus needs to be at home. The focus needs to be on what's going on in the UK and what's going on in America and the respective countries. Because if we don't, then we're essentially funding a war when we've got chaos in our own streets, when people are struggling to we've seen with the winter fuel payments, we're making all these sort of cuts and we're increasing taxes, but we're also funding a war that's going on that we really don't have a lot of knowledge on and a lot of understanding on. We're doing it on the basis of this kind of idea: Russia bad, Ukraine good, Zelensky good, Putin bad, and it's really complicated. And I think that was my point of we're going through the timeline. It's a really complicated issue. It's not so binary as good guy, bad guy. And
I agree.
Does it make sense for us to fund all of this, send our money to go to a foreign country whilst we're struggling as it is? To me, that seems really bizarre.
And I think you'll get a lot of support for that as well, because I think people are deeply distressed. I remember putting a post on social media a few months back just saying, are you happy to continue funding Ukraine? I would say it was 99.9% absolutely not, because as you say, we need the money here. And so that is a real problem. It is pure madness, absolute pure madness. And I do appreciate you going through that timeline, because I think information often gets lost in the cracks, doesn't it? It's, we hear all these banner terms, obviously, from the mainstream media, which is entirely captured. I compare it in some respects, SUNIL. I don't know if you do, but I see Ukraine as like Israel, and I see Russia in some respects almost like Palestine, obviously not under the cosh in the same respect at all, and they're much more capable of defending themselves. But I mean that in terms of how mainstream media supports them, because obviously mainstream media support in Russia, Ukraine is almost entirely, actually is entirely Ukraine, isn't it? Because Russia has been a bogeyman for as long as I've been alive. Is that your recollection?
I think that's really the problem for a lot of it. I think a lot of people have, the Cold War happened such a long time ago, but I think people still have that mentality of Cold War still exists now. Like Russia's a threat. Russia is not the same Russia from 30, 40 years ago. They're nowhere near as powerful. They're nowhere near as strong as what they used to be in terms of as a global force. You know, China has completely taken over from Russia in terms of as the superpower of the world. And they, I would argue, have a lot more influence in what goes on and are probably a much more of a bigger question we should be talking about in the West, the role that they're going to play. And I think that's a much bigger issue. But I think people are still stuck in that the age-old Russia evil superpower kind of thing, when they're not as powerful as they used to be in terms of their military size, the population's not really been increasing rapidly. They're not as a superpower like they used to be. So I think we're stuck still in that mentality of seeing Russia as the Cold War mentality, and I don't think we've really
exactly that. Exactly that. And that's being echoed in the comments. You're absolutely spot on there. So, I mean, what can we ultimately do? We have people like Boris Johnson, who's absolutely, obviously, up to his eyeballs in this. He's completely promoting our continual support of it. I mean, they've set up a separate office, I believe, in Westminster for him to do so. So is there anything that we can do?
I think just having these conversations, really exposing what's going on.
Yes,
I would like to think change of leadership, change of government would make a difference, but I'm not sure, because I think a lot of it is just so entrenched in people's mind. I think a lot of people are scared to say what we've just said about this conflict, because I think they just have the presumption that the moment you say anything like what we're saying, we are Russian apologists, we're Putin apologists,
right.
And I think people are really scared to have that kind of conversation. But I think the majority of people in this country, if we're being brutally honest, are not really bothered about what's going on in Russia, Ukraine, as much as people think. I think they're much more concerned about what's going on in their own home, what's going on in their own four walls, the fact that their lives are getting progressively worse. And I think that is a much bigger issue that we at home should be handling. And I think we're really sidetracked on issues, if we're being honest, that we don't really fully understand. And it was really well done.
Spot on.
In the US debate. It was in the Republican primaries, and they did. Somebody asked Nikki Haley, who was running to be the leader of the Republicans, potentially the president, and they asked her on the spot, like, what are the regions that you've said that we should send troops or we should send missiles and give them in to Ukraine? And they asked her which regions are currently at war, which regions are under threat. She couldn't answer any of them. She had no idea of any of the regions, but she wants to send millions, billions of pounds, but she cannot tell you which regions right now Russia are attacking and Ukraine are defending. How does that make any sense?
Wow. I mean, that's shocking in its own right, isn't it? So, yeah, thank you. You're absolutely right. We need to have these conversations, and we need to be absolutely unapologetic about them, because I think Stephen sums it up, and that is, I was always brought up to think Russia is evil. And I think that has clouded many people's judgment about what is taking place. But you have just cut through all of that with such clarity, and I absolutely appreciate it. Thank you. So let me direct you to another topic that I know you will also cut through with great clarity, and that is obviously Keir Starmer yesterday talking about migration, saying there's a migration crisis, but it's less than it was, although it is at an all-time high, right?
Yeah, so I think the figures from last year were incorrect, and there were more than 100,000. They should have been more than 100,000. Look, I don't think I think the reality is, regardless of Keir Starmer or his pledges, I don't see this changing anytime soon. And I think that there is, I think, a darker side to this, or if you like, fudging the numbers side to this. And I think, regardless of even his views or Rishi Sunak's views or Boris Johnson's views on this, I think we've used immigration as a way to boost our GDP. So a way to say, look,
Right.
we're funding our GDP is going up and up and up because we're getting essentially more people to come to this country to get paid less, do low paid jobs. And I think it's a way to fudge numbers and to make our economy look like it's growing when we know it's not. We know the average person in the UK is definitely worse off than they are. And I think that is something that really needs to be, when they make these statements of we have 1% growth or whatever, I think there needs to be a lot more cutting through that and essentially saying, well, where is that growth going and who is actually benefiting from that growth? Because it seems our services are definitely worse. Our taxpayer money is not being spent remotely usefully, it seems, right now in this country. It seems like our services are overburdened. It seems like the school systems, I think I have a lot of empathy for teachers, because I think they end up, they're not just teachers now. I think Labour even talked about the school meals that, you know, we're no longer teaching parents to be parents, we're teaching schools it makes no
it's the state becoming a parent, though, isn't it? Which is often, there has been a drive for a very long time to separate parents from children so that the state becomes all powerful. But let us talk about that cost, because the cost of the actual asylum system itself has risen to 5 billion. 5 billion, that's the highest level of spending on record, and up by more than a third in a year. And that's according to separate Home Office data. So, I mean, some 25,244 migrants have arrived on Channel boats in the year to September, slightly ahead of the figures for 2023. I interviewed Dr. Simon Elmer, who's done a great deal of work on this, including about the Great Replacement, etc. And he actually said, oftentimes the people in the boats are not the problem. What is the problem is the sheer volume behind the scenes that we're not seeing, the actual legalized migration that's taking place. So it is troubling, because the thing is that I want to make absolutely clear here, my camera's just whizzing around for a second. I want to make absolutely clear here that is that I absolutely understand the benefits that come from all people coming together. I absolutely support that and have done all of my life, frankly. But clearly there is a bigger agenda taking place here. And as you say, Sunil, it's somewhat dark, isn't it?
Definitely. And I think the big change, Sonia, from now to maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago, where it's changed is these numbers are astronomical. These are not like, you know, you don't have to be any politically inclined, left, right, whatever. Like this is, we are changing the fabric of this country, like actively. And I think there is some serious consequences to that. You know, you're going to see a complete loss of British values, a complete loss of British culture. You're actually seeing, you know, I saw something the other day where there were immigrants who, you know, who with broken English, basically saying the numbers are too high. Like, this is just not like why we came to this country in the first place. To, you know, we want to adopt British values. We want the British customs. We want our kids to speak British language, and we want all this sort of stuff. And so you're actually getting, it's almost like a universal agreement in Britain, which is that the numbers are just astronomical, and they are really disturbing in terms of what's going on in the country. So I don't think we've really tackled it. I think stronger rhetoric is so important. There's a really good example of this with Biden and Trump in terms of what happened in the presidency when Biden was had beaten Trump in the last election, the previous one, and it was essentially the month in which Biden was coming into power, the January in which he was going to get inaugurated, we saw like the numbers were more than like 700% had gone up from border crossing from Mexico to America. Wow. And the reason is pure rhetoric. You know, they didn't cut any services in that time. There was no changes in terms of what was going on the border control in such a short space of time. But it was just the power of rhetoric, that it's important to basically say, if you're coming to this country illegally, you're going to go back. And it's as simple as saying that. And I think that deters people from coming in the first place. We're seeing that in Italy. They've got a strong, powerful woman leader right now who is making seriously good changes. And a lot of that is through her powerful rhetoric. And then it's being more practical about trying to find the solutions. But I think we're really worryingly going to destroy the fabric of this country, and if we're not careful. And I think we're down that path right now. And I think it's deeply concerning.
Yeah, and again, another very uncomfortable subject, isn't it? It's uncomfortable because oftentimes there is the danger, and I myself feel a little weird about it. I must admit, Sunil, that because my dissertation was actually about how mainstream media demonize people coming into the country. So I fought long and hard. I did a psychology degree over 10 years ago, so I fought long and hard for us to get some balance. But I also have to realize that there is something desperately wrong taking place in our country. But it isn't. And I think that's one of the powers of the things that we do around here, is that we are prepared to have uncomfortable conversations with uncompromising people, because we need people who are prepared to shoot from the hip. And you are one of those people, which is why you're clearly getting a lot of work in legacy media, because you're unusual. You're standing up and being counted. And also there is I think they think, oh, well, okay, well, if SUNIL is saying it, it's not a problem. But that's not really where you're coming from, is it?
No, I think it is a bit, if I'm honest, I think it is a bit easier for me. I think just by being brown and being of Indian heritage, I think it does make it a bit easier, because I think, you know, I'm not sure if I would say this if I was white, because, you know, the first thing somebody would say is, you know, you're being racist, you're being bigoted. And would you really have the energy to constantly battle and say, no, I'm not, and try? I think it's so hard. I think it's easier for me because you can't really play that race card. So that kind of debate goes out the window. And I think then it becomes more of a conversation. And I think I think the majority of even brown people, black people, I think are inclined to agree with what I'm saying, with what you've been saying. But I think we're told, in terms of ethnic minorities, that this is how you should be thinking. You know, I saw some of the stuff against Swela got and Preet Patel's got in the past, when they talk about when they say migration is too high, and people will say the most mean, horrible things about them, and basically say, I've seen it from the Indian community. People say they're basically not brown, they shouldn't be considered brown anymore. Like, you know, they're basically, we can go after them because they're no longer Indian or brown because of what they're saying. And it's bizarre. It's a really strange, it's a kind of mental control. It's a kind of thing of saying, you know, you need our help, you should be thinking a certain way, you should be acting a certain way. I'd argue they're doing this with everyone, but I think when it comes to ethnic minorities who do speak out, I think they really get very agitated, and I think they get uncomfortable because they're not really sure how to really respond to
it. Ugly stuff, isn't it? You know, my daughter's half Jamaican, as one example. It's ugly stuff. Anybody who dares to speak out who isn't white is like a coconut, or like really discriminatory, demonizing words, as if anybody who isn't white isn't allowed to even have an opinion about those issues. And again, I really appreciate you being so forthright, SUNIL. I truly do. Before you go, I just want a quick word from you about farming. We've got all manner of things going on with farming at the moment. Did you hear anything about Arla? And if not, no problem, because I'll be talking about it after you anyway. Are you familiar with Arla?
Not familiar with Arla. I know the brand, but not familiar with it.
They're introducing it for cows, but I'm going to be talking about that later anyway. But tell us your thoughts on what's going on with farming at the moment. I think it's all part of the same plan, isn't it? All the same people.
The crazy thing, Sonia, it makes, like, you know, they did COP29, where Britain sent the most people to COP29 than any other country. Absurdly, the country, we're going to a climate change event all about carbon emissions, yet we're sending the most amount of people to it, which is pure hypocrisy. But the farming thing, again, surely if this Labour government is so climate obsessed and, you know, thinks that we're all going to die if we don't do something about carbon emissions, surely we should be like so pro farming, because if we're producing more products in our country, then that means we don't have to go get planes, ships coming from foreign countries that are causing carbon emissions coming into here, that we're having to import all these goods, get all these goods elsewhere. Surely it would make sense that we support British farmers in a remarkable way, so they produce our own produce. And the thing about farming, where I just don't understand why people, COVID should have taught us something. And one of those things should have taught us is, you know, we need locally produced goods. Like, it's really basic. You need some locally produced goods in your country, because what happened during COVID, we saw that the shortages in certain food supply. So it makes sense that we should have food being made in our country. It also makes sense, I think, for us to be a bit more energy independent with what's going on in the war in Russia, Ukraine. I think that's a really important thing that people should be talking about, is energy independence, whether that comes from oil, wind, gas, whatever. I can't claim to be an expert on this, but I think we need to be energy independent as a country. To me, oil seems the easiest one. It's the cheapest one. And I know every day, apparently, it's going to run out, and it still hasn't run out. And so I think we should be really thinking about these things. But it seems like COVID has made no difference for a lot of people and made no impact. The fact that these farmers are being, you know, penalized like this and being attacked like this is crazy, considering we went through this 2 years ago, less than that, in terms of the food shortages issues we had. We're seeing inflation going up for general groceries, general produce, because we're again having to import everything from abroad. Surely we can cut those costs, cut those tariffs, cut those things by producing more from home. We can then potentially export them. I mean, to me, it seems fairly basic common sense, but
common sense is missing, though, because the problem is that we are all having to follow the diktats of the globalists. That's the problem, isn't it? It's all linked up. Everything that you've discussed today is all linked up. It's the same people. And just finally, before you leave, I have to ask you this: what are your thoughts about Bill Gates? I bet you've got some thoughts. About him.
I mean, the thing is, like, for him, I'll go with the health thing, because this is his new obsession, constantly talking about health. And, like, I just find it ironic. If you look at Bill Gates, he should not be talking to anyone about health. If you're going to talk about health, practice what you preach. The moment he starts talking about this sort of stuff, I find it bizarre and absurd. And again, it's just control, right? I think his whole game, this whole thing that he's doing is control. There's no doubt he revolutionized the internet, Microsoft.
Right, right.
Genius. But that's where it stops. And I think that's where it should have stopped with him. He's trying to exert this extra power in our country, in Britain, in I don't know. I've got some really, I really question a lot of the stuff he's done. And I hope one of the things that happens with the Trump administration is we see some of those important files that come out against the Epstein, the Diddy, and all this sort of stuff. I would hope, and I've got a feeling that maybe they will be stopped somehow, but I would love to see all of this really come out in the open, because I think he would have a lot more questions to answer to than he does right now. And I'm confident if those files were released, I think it'd be a really interesting day for a lot of these globalists. Whether it actually happen or not, I think is a different story.
What a brilliant guest you've been this morning, SUNIL. Everybody, this is SUNIL Sharma. He is a media commentator amongst all manner of other things. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Take good care of yourself. Have a good weekend, SUNIL.
You too, Sonia. Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant, everybody. This is what we need. We need more of this, don't we? And the thing obviously about what we do around here, and I think it's really important. Yes, I am absolutely aware that my Gates is a puppet, just like Musk, says somebody. SUNIL cheers. Oops, the comments are going so quick this morning, I can't even keep up with them. Yes, I'm absolutely aware that my camera's on a bit of a weird one, but I don't want to mess with it in case it suddenly spins around. So I'm going to try and keep still. There you go. Right. Thank you, SUNIL, says IBR. Thank you. Absolutely. Brilliant. Such straight forward, no nonsense talking, which we love around here. Definitely no common sense in the House of Commons, says Cavan. Indeed. Indeed. Now, look, we're having a busy morning, aren't we? I want to bring in my next guest, but just before I do, I think I just want to comment on this just briefly. And that is the very, very sad funeral of Peter Lynch. On Wednesday, hundreds of mourners turned out for the funeral. The mainstream media called him a rioter. He killed himself in his jail cell. He was given a 2-year sentence over a protest outside a hotel which was housing asylum seekers. 61-year-old grandfather Peter Lynch, he was found unresponsive in his cell at HMP Moorland on October the 19th. He'd been serving the jail time after pleading guilty to violent disorder and being part of unrest at the Holiday Inn Express in Manvers on August the 4th. And it's just awful. It's absolutely awful. I mean, here's a picture of Peter and the sign he's holding. I don't have any problems with that. He's talking about corruption at Davos, within the WHO, within WEF, within Vanguard, BlackRock, MPs. The problems with police. We've seen the problems with police. They've acted like an army lately. So I'm very, very sad that this poor man, and here's an image from his funeral. You can see the mourners. I'm very, very sad this has ended this way. I think there's a great deal more to come out about Keir Starmer. I think, for starters, Peter Lynch should not have been in prison. Neither should others. And this is an outrage. They've been basically imprisoning the resistance. That's what they've been doing. They've been imprisoning the resistance while letting out of jail, because it's overcrowded, people who are problematic. So rest in peace, Peter Lynch. I don't believe for a second that you will have died in vain. Shouldn't have happened in the first place. Absolutely horrendous. Poor sod. Poor sod. No matter what he said, he was treated abysmally. Are we talking about the same person here? Yes, Judith. I think Judith's point is correct. I've heard MPs say a damn sight worse, and they're still breathing. Absolutely, sister. I've got you loud and clear. Craig said they killed a kind grandfather. Yeah, he was a political prisoner. Make no mistake about that. Right, let me talk to somebody who understands how this damn world is working. Here he is. How are you, Dr. David Hughes?
I'm very well, thanks, Sonia. Good to be with you.
Good to have you with us. So when I say you understand how the world works, let me give our viewers some background to you. You're the author of COVID-19, Psychological Operations and the War for Technocracy, Volume 1. That was published this year. Wall Street, and also Wall Street, the Nazis and the Crimes of the Deep State. That was also published this year. And as you say yourself, together, these two books, they seek to provide the big picture regarding the shocking transformation in the global political economy since 2020. You are, of course, an academic. You've, well, let me see, you had 11 continuous years of full-time employment in academia, and you decided to leave the profession this year. Why did you?
In a nutshell, because I reached the conclusion that speaking truth to power in any fundamental sense is incompatible with an academic career. I think that the profession is too beholden to funding interests and to money, and there are various other complicating factors. But ultimately, when we really need to get to the bottom of the terrible events that have been taking place since 2020, and indeed going back to the war on terror, so much of it is premised on lies and deception, and it should be the job of academics, above anybody else really, to be exposing lies and deception, and it simply hasn't happened. So in order to do the kind of work that I'm now doing, I felt like I had to leave the profession.
So as we know, academia has been captured, hasn't it? There's no doubt about it. It must have been very hard for somebody like yourself functioning within it over the last few years.
Yes, it's been difficult. As much as anything else, there are kind of insidious, silent, kind of hidden mechanisms.
Right.
So, for example, intellectual ostracization is often one of the early warning signs. So, prior to 2020, I was being accepted onto the international conference circuit without any problems, attending all of the major conferences. Everything was fine. Since 2020, because I have insisted on pursuing the kind of research that I have been doing, every single one of my applications to attend conferences has been rejected. And of course, you can see how that then builds, because it then starts to damage the CV and so on. So these things kind of start small, but it's pretty obvious where they head.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's really horrible stuff. So you're on this new journey. You took a leap of faith, which is so vital. You have a phenomenal Substack. I've been working my way through it. I was like, okay, what can I actually talk to him about on YouTube? Of course, because we are surrounded by all manner of rules, not least their medical misinformation policy. But we can certainly talk about the psychological weaponry of C19. And I think that was a major turning point for you, right?
Yeah, very much so. So my book, COVID-19 Psychological Operations and the War for Technocracy, is volume 1 of a 2-volume project. It's 400 pages long, and it essentially seeks to unpack just half of the psychological warfare that was waged against populations transnationally in 2020 and 2021. And it's very frightening, actually, because the number of techniques and mechanisms that we used is staggering, ranging from techniques involving shock and stress, through trauma-based mind control, deliberate inculcation of fear, weaponized deception, cognitive attack, the creation of mass paranoia and social division. And what I argue is that all of this was done on purpose. All of it was meticulously planned. And all of it was intended to weaken the population psychologically ahead of what I call the wider war for technocracy.
Our first guest this morning, journalist Gemma Cooper, compared what's happening at the moment with the assisted dying bill and the level of coercive control with what you're talking about there, the psychological warfare that we're under during C-19. Do you see parallels?
Well, yes, I actually get into that topic in my other book, Wall Street, the Nazis and the Crimes of the Deep State. And in that book, I argue that we in the West, since 2020, have been on a very similar trajectory in terms of political economy as the 1930s Nazi Germany. And one of the many parallels and continuities that I draw in chapter 2 of that book involves precisely the theme of euthanasia. So we saw this being introduced in Germany in 1933. And again, it started small and it was framed as so-called deaths of mercy and so on, doing people a kindness. And over the ensuing 12 years, of course, as we know, it gradually got worse and worse and culminated in genocide. So when we see the MAID program in Canada, for example, coming in, and now in this country, of course, Matt Hancock, our former health secretary during COVID, has been one of the major proponents in pushing for this so-called assisted dying. If you understand your history and if you see it as part of a broader unfolding project to build a global form of totalitarianism, then this is deeply troubling and needs to be opposed.
It absolutely does. And I want to talk about technocracy because I think that's really important. Is Elon Musk a technocrat?
Well, his grandfather certainly was, and I would say yes, Elon Musk himself is certainly advancing technocratic agendas from his Starlink project, trying to bathe the whole world in EMF through the Neuralink project, trying to connect human brains essentially to the internet. It's pretty obvious that he is, and I think that the wider issue that we need to focus on is precisely technocracy. Patrick Wood's work would be the first place to start in this regard, and what we're seeing taking place now is an attempt globally to remake the whole of politics, economic, society, and so on, pretty much the whole of human life, in the image of technocracy. And so what this is in very simple terms is the scientific management of society. It's the idea that there's an elite group of people, the technocrats, who have all the data and they, with the power of their computers and so on, are able to determine the most efficient and rational allocation of resources in society. So we are supposed to surrender all of our power and our sovereignty to the technocrats. This is antithetical, of course, to liberal democracy, and it ultimately amounts to a form of totalitarianism.
We have a complete and utter failure in our political class, don't we? Why are we not learning the lessons from history regarding politicians?
It's a very good question. Yes, I mean, what we're seeing, well, it's been going on for many years, of course, but I think in accelerated form since certainly 9/11, but since 2020 as well, is the progressive hollowing out of liberal democracy. And I get into this in chapter 3 of my COVID book, when talking, for example, about the failure of Parliament when it came to every single COVID measure. They were all just nodded straight through, and sometimes you even had, for example, in one case, the House of Lords putting a paper back to Parliament, presenting evidence why was it entry to nightclubs requiring an injection or something. I forget what it was specifically, but throwing it back to Parliament, and still they wanted to push through with this. I remember the Deputy Speaker of the House, Rosie Winterton, just laughing with delight, glee written all over her face in October 2021, when Parliament didn't even bother to vote on renewing these measures, which Lord Sumption, former QC, regarded as some of the most draconian and oppressive measures that had ever been introduced in this country. And so we have seen a complete failure of the political class to actually serve the public.
And what I gather from your work is that you have a very clear understanding that what we're actually engaged in is a war. Very simplistically, I'm breaking it down here, but a war of good versus evil. Is that really the case?
Well, it's a war on many fronts. In the first 5 words of my COVID book, I use the phrase global class war, because that's fundamentally what this is. It's essential to understand the class relations that are involved. It does also amount to a war between good and evil, in my opinion. I don't think that anybody can look back at the measures that were enacted in 2020 and beyond, masking children for hours at a time.
Some shocking stuff, right? Really shocking stuff. But do you think that these people knew? Do you think that doctors knew? And I'm not here as an apologist, but oftentimes it's a cult-like mentality where they just get on with it, right? And they just, like you say, the politicians, they just nod it through. Of course, it's their responsibility to know, but do you take my point? Do you think they just went along with it because it was like, oh, this is a pandemic and there was lots of panic going on? What are your thoughts about that? Or do you think they are complicit?
Yeah, I think they're complicit.
Right. Fair point.
Yeah, I mean, in the book, I speculate. I don't know in what measure these people were bullied, blackmailed, bribed, brainwashed, but it's very clear that it's a combination of those things and that they failed.
Right. So talk to me also about the overhauling of our monetary system, because obviously there's been a huge push, hasn't there, for the digitalization of money and CBDCs. How close do you think we are to that?
Well, if you believe the media, it's going to come in this country next year. I'd like to think we're much further away from it than that, because again, what this is an attempt to establish a technocratic form of totalitarianism. So if central bank digital currencies are successfully rolled out, what we will have is an all digital financial system and no more cash. And at that point, money will no longer exist as a free means of transaction. Instead, what we'll have is a system which Augustine Carstens, the head of the Bank for International Settlements, in 2020 himself admitted would allow central banks to impose conditionalities on the way in which your money is spent. It's not really money at that point, but for example, the central bank can determine how you spend your money, on what, when, where. If your money expires, it can even potentially turn your money supply off. So when you're looking at that level of control, this is very, very frightening stuff. I mean, people might say, oh, I would never take another injection ever again. Really? What happens if they turn your money supply off?
Right. Like a social credit score, you're saying. Yeah, exactly that. And worse. Absolutely. The other thing that I think is really interesting that you also tackle is about the whole idea of a true resistance. Now, obviously, it's very confusing sometimes to know who's really with us, who's working with us, and whether there is actually indeed controlled opposition, because we know there has to be. We've seen infiltration. That's happened extensively. It happened with the police, the whole spy cops, where they infiltrated so deeply they were having children with these activists. So how do we work out who is truly part of the resistance and who is really working with the other side?
That's a tough one, isn't it?
It's a very tough one, but I thought if anybody could answer it, it might be you.
Well, I defer in the first instance to the work of Alex Creel on this. I thought he drew some very interesting points to attention regarding, for example, the reach of particular commentators. If somebody is attracting hundreds of thousands of views on all of the major platforms and is being relentlessly promoted and cross-promoted, then there are reasons for suspicion. If a commentator has a much smaller audience and is routinely shadow banned and censored and so on, then they're probably more trustworthy. Again, are there kind of major hit pieces written against a person? Because this often happens to those who are getting closer to the truth. does the person have a consistent track record, in your opinion, of doing honest work, or have they suddenly kind of appeared out of nowhere? There's all kinds of questions that need to be asked. But
are they
briefly,
opportunistic? That's also a good one, isn't it? And how are they
what's the
speaking
motives? Are they doing it for money? There's so many things to ask. The sad thing that I've come to realize this year, in my opinion at least, is that the proportion of what I call Camp 2 commentators, which are those who entertain doubts about official narratives, but never go as far as the
like
really
never fully
and
commit to it. Yes, I know exactly the type you mean.
That group is very, very large actually, compared to what I call Camp 3, which is the people who are really trying to get at the truth. Right. So you have these different layers of perception management, and it makes getting to the truth ever so hard.
We've got lots of questions coming in for you, David. I want to get round to also talking about the judgment of Richard D. Hall, which we will shortly, but let me ask you some questions. John said, do you think we'll find another way of trading with each other separate from the deep state?
Well, it's difficult to know. I mean, that's one possibility, of course, and people talk about these kind of parallel structures. Personally, I'm skeptical of how far that can be taken. I mean, I recognize that these kind of things took place in the Soviet Union, for example. But what we're looking at now is a system which is global and so all-encompassing that unless the whole thing is stopped, and unless this transnational ruling class that's trying to do this to us is overthrown, I can't see ultimately where that's going to go.
It's so difficult. I think there's many of us out here and we want to do the right thing, but obviously there are some very nefarious actors and characters on the world stage. We have to be careful. What are your thoughts about Trump? Sorry, I'm throwing stuff at you here. I hope you're fine with all this.
Oh, I'm absolutely fine. Trump is an actor. He's put there to win the trust of tens, if not hundreds of millions of US citizens and others further afield. And they are encouraged to believe that he is some kind of savior figure, that he's going to stick it to the man, he's going to fight the deep state. We went through all of this once before in 2016. He promised to drain the swamp wasn't drained. He still styles himself as the father of the vaccine. I mean, who would trust this guy under these circumstances?
Right.
And already, since being re-elected, he's staffing his cabinet just full of pro-Israeli politicians. So there's no reason at all to trust Donald Trump.
It's really difficult. Let us talk about something more local then. Richard D. Hall, he is, of course, an investigative journalist. He's just been through a court case in which he was sued for harassment and GDPR at the hands of the Hibberts, Mr. Hibbert and his daughter, I think Eve Hibbert. And Richard D. Hall lost the case in the High Court. And as I say, he was sued by two people. It was to do with the Manchester Arena bombing in May 2017. And you've done a real deep dive. And now, if there is one topic that is currently dividing the quote unquote alternative media, then Richard D. Hall probably has to be it. Some commenters say he is absolutely, unquestionably a state asset. And the role of that court case was to make the rest of us who are realizing that there are many conspiracies taking place are just idiots, which, to demonize us, to discredit what we're saying. On the other hand, there are people who are saying he's a victim. He's an investigative journalist who set out to look at a story. He did what journalists should do. There was no bomb in Manchester. And so it is a very, very divided camp, which in its own right, I feel is problematic because that divides people again, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, there's nothing wrong with division because people should be entitled to express their views and debate them openly in a democratic society. The problem that I have with this is that I'm firmly on the side of Richard D. Hall, and I've published 3 parts of a 9-part analysis so far on my Substack, and what I'm doing there is to actually look closely at how the legal verdict was reached. And it seems to me from close analysis that it's absolutely indefensible, that it's a complete travesty of justice, that the logic that's involves all kinds of contradictions, self-contradictions, selective applications of the law, even outright favoritism of the claimants at various points. So my view on this is that Richard D. Hall is indeed a victim of the British justice system. When we began this interview, you were talking about the other case in which the unfortunate gentleman had taken his own life in prison
Peter
because of
Lynch.
this system. So what we're seeing more broadly is a gradual move towards the criminalisation of dissent and viewpoints and evidence which challenge official state narratives. Now, I've been quite dismayed to see that publicly there has been hardly any support at all in the so-called alternative media for Richard D. Hall. Essentially, Ian Davis has been fighting a one-man show, and I'm firmly behind everything that Ian has written on this, and I'm now trying to add my own voice to it. But this is an extremely important case because what Hall was able to demonstrate through primary forensic analysis is that there are many, many serious questions to be asked actually about the official account of what took place in Manchester. And we're dealing with primary empirical evidence that you can look at with your own eyes. And it seems to Ian and to me that the whole point of this this trial, I mean, I think it's more of a show trial personally, is to intimidate other investigative journalists not to do this kind of work, not to question state narratives, and also potentially to lay the ground for future legislation which will make asking those questions even harder. So much rides on this case actually for the alternative media, and at the moment it's the response has been extremely disappointing.
That is deeply troubling, obviously, as an investigative journalist, deeply troubling indeed. And you make a number of very good points in your Substack articles. I think we've already put the link in the description. But one of them is that it's not the norm for media to be sued for harassment, because if that was the case, we would have been doing it for a very long time, because some members of the media, not myself included, have done horrendous things, go through people's bins, hack people's phones, right? Where are the people being convicted for any of these things? But here's the thing, is as you say, it's not common to sue media for harassment. So that in itself sets a sort of precedent as well. But the other thing I think is very curious, and that is the claimants themselves are not even central to Richard's story. So that is curious as well.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, none of it really stacks up when you look at it. I mean, the judgment itself observes that it's the bar of proof is so high that essentially it hardly ever happens that any media entity is convicted of harassment. And just to put this in context, if you think, I don't know, let's take the Harry and Meghan case now, love them or loathe them.
I mean, Piers Morgan,
they were hounded.
His absolute obsession with Meghan Markle, I thought, should have been criminal. It was because he had massive platforms in which to hound her day in and day out, and was then eventually forced to walk out when the weatherman on the breakfast show pulled him up. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Harry and Meghan is a good example.
Yes, and by their own account, they claim that it was the influence of the British tabloid media in particular, which drove them out of the country. So if even a senior British royal is suffering all of that, and yet no media entity is found guilty of harassment in that case, then it beggars belief, does it not, to claim that Richard D. Hall has behaved in a worse manner than that. The whole thing is ridiculous on its face. It's also the case that he'd never actually met either of the claimants. He'd never tried to meet either of the claimants. He'd never exchanged a word with either of the claimants. I mean, it's
actually based on very little, isn't it? Which you also break down. Just remind me, what the claim itself was actually based on.
Well, that's a very good question. So the claimants identify 8 different elements of what is called a course of conduct by Hall. These involve 4 videos that he hosted on his website, a visit that he made to Eve Hibbert's home in 2019, a book that he produced, a film that he produced, and some lectures that he gave in person. And the claimants allege that this course of conduct was in fact constituting harassment. Now, when you look at what legally constitutes harassment, it's a deliberate and persistent course of conduct which is designed to and does cause unreasonable and oppressive psychological harm to the claimants. Now, you know, when you break it all down, you know, the first two videos that Hall put up on his website, he hadn't even heard of the claimants at that point, and the judge acknowledges this. And so what I've been doing in my Substack articles is to actually strip this all back and to say, well, where exactly is the harassment? Because it really isn't obvious at all.
It sort of tells me many things, but the other thing I'd like to hear from you, and that is, how much of a role, if any, do you think the BBC verified Mariana Spring played in him being sued?
Personally, I think they were central. I think we're looking at a coordinated state operation here,
right,
involving, of course, the intelligence agencies, who, if Hall is right, were behind what's been taking place. The BBC, of course, through Mariana Spring and Panorama and the Disaster Trolls program and so on, they paved the way for this trial. They were up to no good, demonizing Hall between August and November of 2022, and then lo and behold, December 2022 is when the claimants announced their intention to sue him, and of course now the courts as well, through what to me looks like a completely unjustifiable verdict. So all of these establishment organizations are acting in sync, and they are desperate to maintain the official narrative regarding Manchester.
And what was interesting, of course, was they couldn't actually sue him for libel because the year had timed out anyway.
Yeah.
So that in itself is curious, because I know something about litigation, and one of the things I know is that courts are not impressed by anybody who doesn't take action as quickly as something happens. And so that in itself, I think, is very, very curious. But of course, the official narrative is set on Manchester, isn't it? Because there's even been an inquiry. How do you even begin to unpack something like that?
Well, through primary empirical evidence, and Hall and Davis have done precisely this. And one of the valuable aspects of Davis's additional work has been to throw further doubt onto the police inquiry and onto the official public, the police investigation and the official public inquiry. There are questions to be asked here. Davis, for example, shows video footage taken 4 minutes after the bang, and there are some pristine white doors to the hospitality suite, completely unmarked. Primary empirical evidence you can see for yourself. It's already up on my Substack. By the time that those white doors are presented to the public inquiry by the police, they are damaged and they have marks on them. So what is going on?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is what you went back to, and that is, whichever side you fall on this, we should be allowed to ask questions and we should be allowed to defend ourselves appropriately.
Yes.
And so I think ultimately, I think that the message, as you say, again, going back to something you said, this is a deeply troubling message for investigative journalism.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that even before all of this business with the HUGHES kicked off, Hall himself was saying precisely this in relation to Manchester. He said, we have the right to ask questions. And that's been his stance all along. And what we're seeing now, evidently, is an attempt by the state to shut down any questioning, because it seems that this Manchester narrative is a real weakness. And they're going to great lengths now to try and bolster and reinforce it. Paradoxically, however, it's having the opposite effect. Davis argues, and I agree, that they never really expected Hall to be able to defend himself because it costs a lot of money to go through a high court trial. But because of Hall's following, he was able to raise that money. And when you read the transcripts, the defense that he was able to muster with one arm tied behind his back in the court was truly impressive. And as a result, what has happened is that Ian Davis has written his own book on Manchester and published this whole series of articles. And now, as I've read the verdict and the judgment, you know, I'm so outraged by this, I'm writing my own series of articles. And actually, the whole thing is backfiring, because it's becoming obvious to more and more people that there's something really suspect about all of this.
Well, if you can't ask questions, there must be. But I just want to, it's important for me to add this, because obviously this is the other voice that isn't coming through today. And that is for the people who say this absolutely happened. There were victims and we are letting victims down. How do you respond to that?
Well, I don't anymore, because a legal precedent has just been set that if you say a word about the alleged victims, you can be sued for harassment.
Right.
That's the whole point of the verdict.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is, you don't actually have to go there. It's sufficient to look at the primary forensic evidence which Hall and Davis have presented to understand that there is something very off about what we were told. So you don't even need to start making speculations or allegations about the alleged victims. It's not even necessary to go there. Just look at the primary empirical evidence. It's there, available on part 2 of my Substack. It's there in Richard's work and Ian's work previously. Look at it for yourself. Make your own mind up.
Thank you. We appreciate you joining us this morning, everybody. This is Dr. David Hughes. I did try to put his name on the screen, but there's something going on with my StreamYard that won't allow me. I have to work out how to do it, because people in the comment going, who is this man? Who is this man? Well, you can find out more about him. There's a link in the description below. And, you know, I think David's a really welcome voice on the show this morning. We need all perspectives, because the problem, of course, David, about legacy media is there is one perspective which they all agree on, a sort of a consent, isn't it? A widespread consent about how, whether that's the case of Madeleine McCann or this situation. And we need to be able to look at things alternatively, because we absolutely know, we've been shown proof of it, and that is the people in positions of power are not there for the good of our health. David, give us one more whatever comment before you leave us this morning. What would you like to leave us with?
I guess just use your own eyes and look for yourself at evidence, and understand that in terms of the perception management that is being implemented, I think ultimately by the military and by the intelligence agencies, it's not only that the official stories are often wrong and full of lies, but there's also a tremendous level of secondary cover. And so this requires really hard work if you're serious about getting to the truth. But do invest that time, do invest that effort, and look at things for yourself.
We already have people asking about your books. This Lyra's, I know that you mean book there, Lyra. Where can we get your books? I can put a link in the description. Send me, I think I've already got them. Have I got the links? I've got your Substack, and I've got how people can support you. And that's really important, people, because this man gave up his career because he realized he needed to be able to express himself in a way that he was unable to in academia. So please support if you can. And buying books is a blooming good way to do it. So let's sell a ton of David's books today.
Sort of. The COVID book, the hard copy is being sold by the publisher for £110 a copy, and I don't get a penny from that. But I was able to attract open access funding for that book, which means that anybody can legally download it for free and redistribute it for free under a Creative Commons 4.0 license. I don't get a penny from that either. So what I would say is that if you do choose to download the book, which you can do from my Substack, please do also consider giving something back financially, because I'm not making anything from that book. So maybe a paid Substack subscription, or buymeacoffee.com/DA Hughes, whatever it may be. There's a list of support options at davidahughes.net/support. But yeah, it is a precarious path that I'm now on. The other book, Wall Street, the Nazis and the Crimes of the Deep State, is available from Skyhorse Publishing.
Thank you so much. Absolute pleasure to have you with us, everybody. This is Dr. David Hughes. Brilliant. Have a wonderful weekend, David. Take good care of yourself.
Thanks, Sonia. You too.
Thank you. Great to have him with us. Wow. Haven't we been blessed with guests today, people? We're always blessed with guests. We're always blessed with our brilliant, brilliant, brilliant guests. We love them. Yeah, we do. Because I select with some care. Yes, I do. Keep spreading the truth, David, says Lisa. And as I say, whichever side you come down on, I think it's important that we should be allowed to ask questions. The moment we can't ask questions, it's a dictatorship. Guess what we're currently looking at? We're currently looking at being a dictatorship. We must avoid that at all costs. And of course, everything is in place for that to happen. So it's very disconcerting indeed. Right, let me turn to my take on the news now. Let's first of all look at this Arla business, right? I think we need to look at this. So where are we? let me find. Yeah, the Arla Backlash. And also, by the way, there's that year again, 2030, because the whole Arla thing is designed around 2030. So Arla is working with farmers and retailers to trial a new feed additive to reduce emissions in the cows. Farmers who supply Arla will trial the use of it. It's said to reduce enteric methane emissions from cattle. Initially, 30 farmers will trial the use of Bovaer registered, a feed additive that is said to reduce these emissions. The project will highlight how feed additives can be introduced to normal feeding routines. In a first of its kind joint initiative, the project will also see a collective effort from so between the dairy farmers and Morrison's, Aldi and Tesco, right? People are not happy. Viewer Jill wrote in, this is not right. We don't need more additives in our food. We need less and more experimental vaccines. Anyone ask the cows what they want and how it would affect their health and ours? Well, it's a good question, really, isn't it? But the whole point about all of this is it's about ambitious climate change targets. Okay, so obviously this is all part of the net zero agenda. And Arla say the aim is absolutely to reduce CO2 emissions by 30% by 2030. Now, what's been interesting, of course, is to actually see some responses to it. Huge backlash. I'm sorry that my camera keeps moving around, everybody. I do apologize about that. Will it stop now? It's really on a funny one, isn't it, today? So there's been a huge backlash about this, and people are asking dairy suppliers, are you using it? And a lot of dairy suppliers aren't prepared to speak up about whether they are, but some are. And one example is McQueen's Dairies said some dairy brands are trialing Bovaer, a supplement fed to cows to reduce methane emissions. We've received a lot of questions about this and can confirm none of the farmers we use feed their cows Bovaer. Thanks for continuing to support our family-run business. And the other one that I found, no, I think this is important. The Soil Association came out as well and actually made a comment because people were like deeply disturbed. Is this going to be impacting organic produce, for one example? And the Soil Association said, Soil Association organic standards stipulate that all ingredients, components of a feed additive must be actively approved for use and be deemed safe and nutritionally useful for the animal. The main components that make up Bovaer are not included in the list of approved products compounds, and as a result, Bovaer would not currently be permitted for use in organic farming. So the problem, of course, is that many people can't afford organic produce, but that is one good reason to attempt to if you can. But it's really interesting. Arla have even gone so far as to issue a notice of injunction. They've obtained court injunctions that prevent what they say unlawful protests at a number of their sites. A copy of the injunction order is available on the Arla website. Also, Graham's, the family dairy from Scotland, said, we would like to reassure our customers that none of our farming partners, who are also family-run farms, use the additive Bovaer. As fifth-generation farmers and a third-generation family dairy, we're committed to producing high-quality, naturally delicious dairy products. It says rather a lot that these farmers, these independent farmers and the Soil Association feel the need to come out and say this. So, of course, what is it all about? Well, we know what it's all about. Bill Gates is involved as ever. The influence that man has is extraordinary. It's amazing what lots of money can do, isn't it, when it exchanges hands? So it is deeply concerning. We should be concerned. But also what's really troubling is a lot of the companies aren't prepared to answer whether they're going to be using this product. So that's troubling. Now that could be anything. That could be any dairy product, be that cheese, yogurts, milk, you name it. Are they using this product? And what do we know about the long-term impact? Do anybody try and tell me that that is for the good of the health of either the cattle or the humans? Can't possibly be. It's an additive. No. Let me see. What are your thoughts on this? Because people have been screaming about Arla this week. What's this? Yes, Vape King. Bill Gates owns the most farmland in the US. And of course, obviously, this is another attack on our farmland. Let me try and see if I can just quickly fix this. Why is that tracking on? Stop tracking me. That might be better. There you go. That might be better. I'm so sorry about that. Yeah, so obviously this is not good for us. We know it's not good for us. It can't possibly be good for us. Anything nutritious is being sabotaged, says Humphrey. Arla is from Randy and my home country. Arla is so big now, they are squeezing the small farmers, says Drumstick. Use the product or they will close the farm down. Katie isn't actually saying that we have to use it, but I take her point. And look at these comments coming in. I mean, and none of these are based in fantasy. Gates wants people to eat lab-grown meat and other rubbish. This is a fact. The enticements are for farmers to stop farming. Now, I think this is an important topic here, exactly what Beyond Belief has touched upon, because I've seen people on social media asking, like, no farmers, no food, these big groups, what is their position on Arla? And I have not yet seen any of these big groups come out and say, absolutely not. We're sticking to traditional farming. We are not allowing this. No, they're not. And that suggests to me they are being compromised. It's troubling. He who controls the food control the people. That is the reality. It is an attack on farming, Peter. It really is. Not only in the UK. They want to close farms all over Europe. Indeed, they do. Allegedly, Vape King. Absolutely. Allegedly. The methane argument is a con. All vegetation produces it when it breaks down, regardless if it's inside a cow or not. And Peter should know because Peter has been involved. You've been involved in small holdings, haven't you, Peter? You know about this stuff. Yes, Gates met SHARMA recently. Now that again is really curious, right? Obviously, we saw in October that Gates rocked up in Parliament with Larry Fink from BlackRock, who owns large chunks of the earth right now. And they went to meet Rachel Reeves, she who has falsified her CV. And they went to meet Rachel Reeves, Chancellor of the Exchequer, and Keir Starmer, PM. And after that, all of the manner of things have suddenly taken place. And we absolutely know that Gates has an interest in farmland and wants to buy up more. And this is a really good way to do it, isn't it? Oh, Sarah is horrified. She's horrified. We're all horrified, Sarah. It's horrible. Marie is now starving. Okay, I'm not sure that's the point. What's this about the government? It might be the government tracking you, Sonia. That's to the government. That's obviously not to our viewers. Yes, bravo, Dr. Hughes, says Aurora. We still on that one? Arlo Food has partnered with supermarkets, Morrison's, Tesco and Aldi to trial the use of methane reducing cattle feed in a bid to reduce emissions. Absolutely, they have. Farmers' crisis is all part of the WEF agenda. So supermarkets make the profit. Public-private partnership. Exactly that. Exactly that. And I love Shug's comment. Only the creator owns the earth. They are the fraudulent squatters. They are indeed. So keep your comments coming about Arla. But the bottom line is this. They don't at this moment in time. And actually, I saw a comment on X and I'd like to read it. It's from Awakened World. Said, if I make and sell soap, I have to state all ingredients. If I make and sell candles, I have to state all ingredients. If you're Tesco and sell milk and beef products into the food chain, you don't have to tell your consumers of a new experimental chemical feed with no long-term data. Mad. And I think that sums it up perfectly. Yeah. Absolutely that. It's outrageous. It is outrageous. Let me move on to something else. This is good news if it's not just sort of showboating. And that is the Attorney General, Ken Paxton. And he's the Attorney General of, let me just have a look at the details of him, because I think this is really curious. So Ken Paxton, Attorney General, and what he's announced now is that Texas is suing BlackRock, State Street and Vanguard for illegally conspiring to manipulate energy markets, driving up costs for consumers. Now, if that is legit, that could be a precedent setter, okay? He goes on to say BlackRock, Vanguard and State Street formed a cartel to rig the coal market, artificially reduce the energy supply and raise prices. Their conspiracy has harmed American energy production and hurt consumers. This is a stunning violation of state and federal law. Well, frankly, More power to your elbow, Attorney General Ken Paxton. More power to your elbow. And may this be the first of many lawsuits, because he is absolutely right, of course. What is taking place under the banner of BlackRock and Vanguard and the rest is essentially global asset stripping. And they are inflating prices, they are manipulating prices, and we, the consumers, are left on the back foot. So if actually there is a politician who is prepared to take this kind of action, I will support them, whether I agree with their politics or not. And I don't know this man's politics, and I don't need to. All I need to know at this moment in time is that he's suing BlackRock, and that feels good enough for me. Anybody hear about that? Anybody hear about that? We need to sue them, right? Or grass eaters. What's that? The hoops you have to jump through to sell your own handmade goods are insane. Very time consuming, says Julie. I hear that. I hear that. Yeah, wow. Wow. Let us hope this is true. I mean, it is true. He's doing it. Let's just hope it comes to something, because oftentimes these things are kind of launched amidst great fanfare, oftentimes because the person who are launching them, especially politicians, they want the attention, they want the spotlight, they want to virtue signal and everything. But this looks like it has the potential. This looks like it has the legs to go somewhere, and let's sincerely hope so. Yes, Jan, great. Absolutely. That's what we need. More of that. Oh, yes, we do. Oh, yes, we do. And I want to touch upon the departure of Martin Frizzell. Now, for our overseas viewers, you may not know who Martin Frizzell is. Martin Frizzell was the big head honcho at This Morning for the last decade. And I worked with Martin Frizzell. Martin Frizzell is, or rather was, well, he'll be leaving next year. He's resigned, but he's not left his post until next year, spring, I believe. Martin Frizzell is the husband of broadcaster Fiona Phillips. And Martin Frizzell issued a letter to staff saying, I'm leaving, I need to take care of my wife. His wife has Alzheimer's, I believe. Let me just find his statement. He said, let me see if I can find it. No, I can't find it. I'm sure I will find it. But let me just tell you my thoughts on Martin Frizzell and who he is, and why I don't actually necessarily believe he's leaving to take care of his wife. As one very savvy journalist pointed out to me, is did he quit or was he pushed? You've got to bear in mind that Martin Frizzell was there throughout the whole time that the situation was happening with main presenter Philip Schofield and a young man that many people believe was groomed, who ended up being a runner on This Morning. And Philip Schofield ended up having something of a relationship with him. And some of it's very dark and we don't know the full details. And there was an inquiry, and I worked at This Morning for 10 years, and people at This Morning told me very clearly that the inquiry was a whitewash. They didn't talk to certain people about it, and the truth has yet to emerge about what happened regarding the young man and Philip Schofield. But the thing is that Martin Frizzell and Philip Schofield, here they are, here's Martin Frizzell and Philip Schofield collecting one of many awards. They were as thick as thieves, like thick as thieves. And obviously the other part of the partnership was Holly Willoughby. And Holly Willoughby, well, so first of all, just to go back a little bit, there was that whole staged coming out of Philip Schofield where he was like, I'm gay, and they were on the sofa, and then there was Holly there doing her fake crying, and then Eamon and Ruth, who were also the other presenters, joined them. And that was all stage managed. It was all stage managed because it was coming out about Philip Schofield having something of a relationship. And I use the word relationship lightly because I don't know when it started, right? So I don't know if relationship is the accurate word to use here. But anyway, so the whole stage coming out, and Philip Schofield actually later admitted that he knew on his wedding day he was gay. And he's just one of those horrible people who's hidden that side of himself because he felt that he would progress more. That's just a reality. And then recently he had this whole thing where he was on a desert island and he was angry, and he's angry because Martin Frizzell ended up, I think, as far as Schofield is concerned, with betraying him, as did Holly Willoughby, because obviously when the whole truth of the matter came out, they distanced themselves from him. Schofield quit again. Did he really quit? But now Frizzell is apparently quitting. But there's more to Frizzell and why I have issues with this man. And one is to do with Madeleine McCann. Martin Frizzell is undoubtedly, unquestionably, the man who was absolutely responsible for solidifying the abduction narrative in the minds of the British nation. And what happened, it's interesting because when I was doing the talk on Tuesday, Martin Frizzell's name came up. And then on Wednesday, this has nothing to do with the talk, obviously, he didn't know about the talk. This is obviously all, but it's just the timing of it, the synchronicity of it. On Wednesday, his resignation was announced. It was really interesting. But the reason that I have issues with him to do with Madeleine McCann was Madeleine McCann obviously was reported missing on the 3rd of May 2007, and on the 4th of May 2007 Martin Frizzell was running GMTV, which is where he met his wife, Fiona Phillips. And GMTV was the pre-runner to Good Morning Britain on ITV. And on GMTV, they allowed a friend of the McCanns to come on without any challenge and say, a little girl went missing last night in Portugal. And that was it. Boom. Boom, the abduction narrative was set. And Frizzell followed that through by making a documentary, again, solidifying the official abduction narrative. And Martin Frizzell and I have crossed swords many, many times. When he came to this morning, I was working at This Morning before him. I was a talking head, one of their lead talking heads. And when he came to This Morning, it was a different atmosphere. I preferred the editor before him. But I adjusted to Frizzell, and I suppose he adjusted to me. And I managed to last on the show as a talking head until 2019. So, like 6-7 years of his reign. And but that was when he finally lost patience with me for pushing the envelope. And that was over an M&S pride sandwich. And I kind of looked at this rainbow sandwich in front of me and I thought, I can't do this anymore. And I ended up talking about the issues to do with transgenderism, and told people to Google cotton ceiling, which went to the top of the Google charts, but he absolutely freaked out. I mean, I was reported to ITV, I was reported to Ofcom, Owen Jones wrote about me in The Guardian, India Willoughby, who I think called me madder than a box of frogs, which is hilarious coming from Willoughby. Hilarious. But I was really attacked for doing that. But I also had huge support. But that was under Martin Frizzell's watch. And he was absolutely furious that I went off script. So Martin Frizzell was more of a dictator, really. It's like he oversaw everything at This Morning, and obviously is still doing until he finally hands over next spring. But the fact is that This Morning is a toxic culture. And may I be absolutely clear here, and that is I did not know about Philip Schofield and that young man, because if I did, you can be absolutely sure that I would have whistleblown. I did know that young man. He brought me coffee on several occasions when I was there. And I just assumed that he was like some college grad who'd come in as a runner. But what was interesting was people were saying right there and then, he's got access all over the place. And what was really curious was this young man was also going to award ceremonies and going on stage with This Morning. That doesn't happen for runners. That doesn't happen for runners. And Martin Frizzell was responsible for what was going on at This Morning then. And it's an absolute toxic culture. It has not survived what has happened. It's limping on now. It's dying. They'll almost certainly fold it and it will kind of reemerge as something else. But I think that Martin Frizzell was always so much more than a TV boss. Always so much more. Official channel response said it is the 24/7 nature of the role, which isn't conducive to Fiona's illness. And next year, Martin, thinks that he's going to have to be around so much more for her. His family commitments are about to change, and he needs a job that can blend into that rather than a job which takes over his entire life. And just going, I have found the email that he sent to staff. He just said, hello, friends. Hopefully you've not heard on the grapevine, and maybe you weren't even in planning today. So this could be a surprise for you, but I'm leaving. This will be my last Christmas at a program that I've loved working on. And the best bit was working with you. Sure it was, mate. Sure it was. There will be much more to come out about Martin Frizzell. Of that, I am absolutely certain, without a shadow of a doubt. Without a shadow of a doubt. Now, I want to switch to this, I think is important, and that is Be Happy. And a number of other people contacted me. And again, this was a question that was raised at the event on Tuesday, and that is Be Happy sent me a video about the webcams in London being switched off. Now, this story really has emerged from a YouTube video by content creator Craig Houston, who actually stumbled across the fact that even though he was on websites that claimed to show webcams all over London, none of them were either working or switched on. There were rows and rows of blank screens bearing names of London sites, and not one of them had images. So you can imagine it is questionable, and I don't blame Craig at all for raising it up. And you out there wanted to know what on earth was happening. And I checked what Craig Houston was saying. And as I say, he was absolutely correct. Based on the evidence that he was seeing before his eyes, it seemed that all London cameras were switched off. And according to the websites he was visiting, there were no cameras on at all, and hadn't been, some for not even 87 days. But I did find a website where cameras were on in London. So this may be a website thing, or it may be something else. I think I did a video. Did I do a video about this? Can I bring it up? Oh, let me see if I can just, pretty sure I did do a video about this just to show you for your own inspection about what was there. London cams, there it is. Let's open it. Right, there you go. Sorry, pretty bad recording, but that's Savoy Place. That's looking over Waterloo Bridge. And this is actually Park Lane. So this is clearly a residential camera. So that's not an official London camera. That is the very famous Abbey Road Studios crossing, of course, where the Beatles crossed across. But look, when I went to other sites looking for Westminster Bridge, which is what Craig was looking at, blank. And there's another one, Westminster Bridge, blank. And another one, and that's Trafalgar Square, central London, blank. So I do think it's interesting what Craig was saying. But anyway, I decided I'm going to have to look into this whole issue of cameras and what's really going on. Right. So first of all, CCTV cameras, it's not straightforward. CCTV cameras are not the responsibility of a central power as such, right? It is the local authorities who are responsible for their own CCTV cameras. Now, bearing in mind that what Craig was talking about was there were no cameras over Westminster Bridge where there was an incident, and that's how he stumbled across it. And that's how good investigations happen, is sometimes you're looking for A and you come up with B, right? And there's been this incident on Westminster Bridge, and then Martin went to look for footage and couldn't find it. Anyway, the people responsible for Westminster Bridge, of course, should be Westminster Council. So I went to Westminster Council and I'm waiting for a response back from them. But in the meantime, I was directed towards their website of areas that Westminster covers, and none of it was actually like where Westminster Bridge is. It goes as far as like Harrow Road, which is where I used to live, and parts all around Parliament, like Great Peter Street, and then there's Horse Ferry Road, SW1 and everything. But actually nothing directly for Westminster Bridge. So I'm wondering whether that is a separate concern, because like the cameras around Parliament, as one example, they are the responsibility of the secretariats in Parliament. So it's quite confusing who's responsible for what CCTVs. And then I thought, well, okay, let me look at what is the issue with broken cameras. Well, actually, the issue of broken cameras should be, certainly in London, that falls under the responsibility of the London Assembly. Well, the most recent thing I could find about broken cameras, according to the London Assembly, was 2019. 2019. It's curious, isn't it? What's going on? And CCTV, the whole of CCTV, is regulated in the UK by the Information Commissioner's Office. And the thing about that is anyone can ask to see images that have been recorded of you by CCTV. Usually rather, if you go to a company and say, you film me crossing Westminster Bridge. So I think this is a good way to do it, right? Is anybody crossing Westminster Bridge then needs to go, okay, to the authority. So you start with Westminster Council, right? Go to Westminster Council, say, I was crossing Westminster Bridge on this day at this time, and I want to see the CCTV footage of it. I think that's a good way around it. Okay. And usually they have to supply that within a month. And they're guided by laws on this. But I do think that Craig has fallen across something quite curious. I don't have the answer. I wish I had the answer right now. I don't. All I know is that the deeper dive that I did on it the more interesting it became, the more it didn't make sense. And by the way, do you know, because I found a Freedom of Information request, somebody had submitted a Freedom of Information request about some of the biggest and richest boroughs in London, including Kensington and Chelsea and Westminster. And they wanted to know the number of crime-fighting CCTV cameras in each of these boroughs. And the response was that the Met is unable to provide the data requested, broken down by borough, because to do so might enable criminals to identify the overall level of CCTV in a specific area. And I thought that was curious, because isn't the whole point also, not the whole point, CCTV is not only to capture what's going on, but it's also to act as a means of people going, oh, I'm not going to do that. So I thought that was curious they're not prepared to say where these actual CCTV cameras are. And what I do know is, based on my own research into CCTV, is that oftentimes what has happened in London is that when major incidents happen, so for example, do you remember when a car was said to have driven into a policeman who was guarding Parliament? There was no CCTV evidence for that. They said CCTV wasn't working on that day. And that's not the first time. And then, of course, we cannot forget 7/7 and the madness of the CCTV there regarding the 4 men who were accused of 7/7, and how the clocks kept changing, right, depending on where the CCTV was in the underground. So it's all very odd indeed. As I say, I don't have the answer. Yes, we are post-consumer. Oh, I'm not. Black Friday, we are. CCTV only exists in London. No, it doesn't. It's all over the country, right? Right, let me, oh yeah, because this is the other thing I wanted to just say very briefly, and that is we have to also be careful that we're not being alarmist. That I know it is easy that when we fall down a rabbit hole to immediately take to the internet and start talking about it, and this is no reflection on Craig. I think Craig had a good point. But what I'm saying is we have to be careful not to be alarmist, because they also want us to be terrified. Fear porn is a very real thing. They've spent millions of pounds of taxpayer money here in America and all over the world to terrify us for the last 4 or 5 years. So we have to be careful that we are not playing a role in that, in terrifying each other. We do. And the reason I say that is there was a whole big thing about King's Cross this week about how it was evacuated. And again, and remember what we were talking about last weekend about the detonation of these packages, apparently. And it's like they're trying to increase fear in the run up to Christmas, right? But what was interesting was when they were saying that there was this major evacuation at King's Cross and that King's Cross was in chaos. Well, guess what? Guess who was actually going through King's Cross shortly after that? Me. And I have the evidence to prove it. Now, I'm sorry about the flashing lights. If anybody's got some issues with flashing lights, please be warned, trigger warning. But this is the area of King's Cross that the Daily Star showed in complete chaos. I went through an hour after it was apparently evacuated and in complete chaos. I didn't even know it had been evacuated, that there was anything going on there. And look how empty this area was. And that's King's Cross, a major station, right? So my point here is, and then when I contacted the station, I'm still waiting for somebody to respond to me about this so-called evacuation and what it was about. But all I know is from my own experience, it was business as usual. And we have to be so careful because we can be our own worst enemies. I know, the thing is that fear sells. People get lots of likes and shares if they're sharing fear. So we have to be careful not to be a part of that. Yes, Marcuson, fear porn. It is. We have to be really careful. And look at that. Rachel said, that's weird. I posted about Euston. A friend said she was there and nothing. Right. Exactly that. So we just have to be incredibly careful. And can I just say, sometimes I get sent evidence and information that I can't use immediately, or it forms part of a larger look at something, as indeed the information sent to me by Vernon. Thank you so very much, sending me very important information related to Joe Cox, related to the man who Tommy Mayer, who was said to have killed her, related to the hospital. Fascinating information, and I'm doing a dig on it now. I really appreciate that. Truly, I do. Truly, I genuinely do. We need to look at some geoengineering. We really do. And somebody pointed out to me that I keep saying, and can I just say, I'm sorry about that. Sometimes I get stuck in saying stuff. Try not to. I'll try not to. What's that? Your British establishment censor everything, says George. Written warnings. That's what it feels like. Bumbling Campbell is responsible. So many. Okay, right. Okay, I can't read that because I'm on YouTube. Morning all. I'm working. Do I watch it all tonight? Have a great day, everyone. That's Mick. No, there isn't Vernon Coleman who sent me that beyond belief. Let's not get confused. It's definitely not Vernon Coleman. It's just Vernon. I won't give his surname, but thank you. Yes, let's see what they can do in the sky. Right, let's bring in some images. Let me just get rid of some of these because I haven't got room in my studio to bring in these images. Well, I've still got all of this. Remove from studio. Oops, bear with me, you gorgeous and glorious people. Let's bring them in, these images that need to come in. So they are slides. Let's your computer and oh God, it's determined to confuse me this morning, isn't it? It is determined to confuse me this morning. Is it here? Yes, here we go. We've got Richard. We're going to open that and it will go easier now, people, I promise. And Spencer. And we want to add that as well. And this is what happens when you do it all yourself. Sometimes you have to do it live on air. But we're okay with that, aren't we? And I want to bring through that one as well. Because I think that's important. There we go. Let's do that. Right. Here we go. So let's talk about this. So we have, here's some photos of Rotherham's sky this morning. All the best, Tony. So these are Tony's images. Okay, I think we can all clearly see what's going on. That was actually, I think, yesterday. Thank you for sending those in, Tony. We truly appreciate that. And Woken Flower said, I saw a man videoing the lines in the sky in Rotherham Town Centre today. If anyone knows who he is or his channel name, could you let me know? Woken Flower, are you Tony? But either way, if anyone knows Tony from Rotherham's video channel, please do let us know. Mr. Wright, what is Sonia's honest estimate of her self-censorship on the YT platform? It's not self. I've no choice. The reason that I use YouTube is the reach is huge compared to everywhere else. It has to be used. It's most people will click on a YouTube link when they won't necessarily click on a Rumble. Or any other smaller platforms. So I had to weigh up the pros and cons of it. And for the most part, I'm fairly free here, certainly freer than I've been anywhere else. The other places that I've worked, platforms, broadcasters, YouTube is actually the freest, believe it or not. But no, I don't like it. It's not ideal, obviously, not ideal at all. But sometimes the censorship that I'm having to use is because I don't want to be sued, is because I think you made a comment that was actually libelous, but I could be wrong. But yeah, I know it's not great. It's not ideal, but it is what it is. And I accept it. And hopefully it will change. Hopefully it will change. We're hearing it will change. So hopefully it will. This is Richard's. And Richard said, let me see, I live in Sowerby Bridge, West Yorkshire, and was setting off to work this morning at about 10 to 8. And while scraping the ice off the car, I happened to look up and saw they were up there spraying us again. So I took a couple of pictures, which I thought you might like for your collection. Indeed. And those are the top two. And the bottom two were from the 21st of August. As Richard so accurately says, they seem to be doing this on a regular basis. Yes, indeed, they do. So that's day and night. There's an interesting comparison going on there. Absolutely. And Spencer sent us this. And actually, Spencer, I haven't uploaded your video, but it's a good one. So I will use that again on Monday. But Spencer sent these images, this time taken on late morning, 17th of November. And very interesting. And the video that I will actually show on Monday from Spencer actually shows, as he says, an unusual flight formation of two planes. Absolutely. Thank you. Keep sending in your images. It's 11:11, points out Healing the Silence. Okay, moving on. A business worth promoting. Pop art, pop up. I promised that any businesses that have been prepared to stand up against totalitarianism, draconian measures that we've been subjected to, I will support them here. And here is one of them. And this is from lovely John. John said, first off, thanks a gazillion. I appreciate that, John. You said some very nice things and I really appreciate that. And this is his business. He says, I'm an artist and designer who was first shadow banned on Facebook in 2016 because I compared life in Barcelona, where I lived for 20 years, and the indie movement was reaching its zenith, to the Palestinian plight. It was creepy and pathetic. They literally stopped me being able to comment on my own post on my own product page for an app I'd written myself and laboriously connected to Facebook. And it is interesting, very interesting. And John goes into further detail about, different things, which is really interesting about how, he's kind of like his intersexuality of being one of those rare minorities. And that is, he says, a poor gay Scot with a brain and a spine. Interesting. Not saying that our Scottish viewers do not have a brain and a spine. They absolutely do. But obviously what he's talking about is the whole LGBT takeover. That's what he's talking about. And I looked at John's work and I thought, this is excellent. Let's promote it. Let us promote it. So that's the name of it. And this is one of my personal favorites. This is Police Everywhere, Justice Nowhere. And look at all the things you can get on. It's not even expensive. There's hats and hoodies and T-shirts and a mouse pad and all manner of things and bandanas. Please check it out. I'll put a link in the description to John's work. I think we really need to look after each other. And I also love this. As he points out, his work is not only about politics or injustice, it's also about art and beauty. This is absolutely beautiful, supernatural range. I love it. Phone covers, T-shirts, absolutely gorgeous. Glorious, John. Thank you very much for getting in touch with us. Much appreciated. So everybody, remember, pop art, pop up. Let's help him. Let's assist him. We need to look after each other. We absolutely do, because they're certainly taking care of themselves. So we need to take care of each other. Oh, yes, we do. And before we get to the last comment, I just want to reflect on this. This touches my heart. I may get quite emotional, actually. And I'm trying not to, because there's really no reason why I should. But I said I want to do this new feature about who your heroes are. Okay. And this is a man who is a hero to one of our viewers. His name is Thomas William Holman. And Trev is one of our regular viewers, great supporter of the show, very much appreciated. And he told me about his dad. And his dad was one of the Wellington bombers in World War II. And the reason that Trev had kind of been prompted to talk about his dad to me was that he'd been contacted by a chap from Wolverhampton who's doing a lecture on Trev's dad and others to do with the Wellington bombers. And there's only one of two Wellington bombers that are left in the world. It's going to be on display. And Trev believes that they used parts of his dad's plane to restore it. And now what's interesting is that Trev's dad's plane was involved in a crash near Muckle Cairn. Dad, as Trev said, was the only survivor, and his four young pals were killed. And what's also interesting about Trev's dad, and it's almost like he had a destiny, was he was one of three triplets, and he was the only survivor there as well. So all of that is really interesting. And Trev said, lucky for Dad, the rear end of the plane he was sat in broke off in the crash. Dad was injured with his back and his left arm was completely broken. He tried to save any of his pals, but the fire was too intense and they all perished. He then had to walk from where he was in the Cairngorms to find help. And luckily, another plane spotted the smoke from the wreckage, and the pilot threw him a map, some fags and matches, and then flew in the direction to where the nearest village was. By the time he got to hospital, his broken arm had set in a really bad way, so they had to break it again, plus they put him in traction for his back. And then Trev just goes on to say, can you imagine in those days making, because his dad then went on, by the way, they gave him a transport pass and told him to go to India and set up to maintain runways, right? Because this is once he was back on his feet. Trev said once he was back on his feet, he couldn't go back to being a rear gunner, so he couldn't hold the handle of the gun because his arm was still twisted. And I think it's hard for us to understand how vulnerable his dad must have been in that plane. These incredibly vulnerable, open to the elements, and very precarious, like the safety of these pilots and what they were prepared to do to protect us. And that's why I think it's really important, because Trev's dad isn't honoured on a statue. The people who are honoured on statues were influential people who could buy their way excuse me, into being honoured on a statue. And that's why I think it's really important to honour people like Trev's dad, because we do have heroes. And I want to hear about you, about your heroes, either in your family or people you knew who aren't with us anymore, but deserve to be remembered and deserve to be recognized. And Trev said that his dad was definitely our hero. He said after the war, he ended up working for Bryant and Mays, which was the matchstick, wasn't it? Or still is, as a painter and decorator, and used to get to the bus at 6:30 a.m. every day to work and back and overtime on a Wednesday for 25 years. And he never complained, even though he suffered with a bad back all those years. And this is where it makes me emotional, because it's the stoicism. And he had numerous operations to try and fix it. As Trev said, he was definitely our hero. We love that. We love that. So in memory of Thomas William Holman, he is the first wake up hero. There you go. Yes, he is. Let me know about your heroes. I think it's important. Yes, I do. And yes. And what have we got? What a generation. Yes, Craig. Absolutely. I mean, you know, it's did he take orders from heroes? I mean, there's a couple of cynical comments there, but you're in there. You're in a chat, right? It is easy for you to be cynical about people who's engaged in war and protecting us, right? What have you done to protect us, though? Right? I think sometimes we can be a bit kind of flippant with comments when in fact we need to look a little bit deeper. That's my take on it. Yes. Where's the link for the mugs? We don't have a link for the mugs just yet. And I'll tell you why. Yes, Peter, indeed, an inspiration. I will have them on Monday. There you go. My mugs. Question the narrative. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Got to, Jan's off. Yes, Peter, I believe so. Absolutely. Crafty Kim said that her granddad used to talk about the heroes. I hear that. D Horse said many of my heroes are right here. Got any t-shirts? Says Judith. We will have. I'm going to have a whole array of merchandise. Yes, I am. Jan's off. I love you too, Fazana. I love you too. And thank you to Trev for telling about your dad. It's really important. I don't have that kind of history. I don't know very much about my history at all in terms of my family, other than they were kind of made up of coal miners and scullery maids, right? I don't have that kind of history to draw on, which is a pity. And please check out Picky and Poor, our soul sound, in the comments. Picky and Poor is a YouTube series where they make good, hearty food. Yes, they do. This one is, according to Soul Sound, how to smack your aubergine, or rather the correct name, caviar d'aubergine. There you go, in French. Right. I want to end on thanking my adversaries. Yes. And that is in real life, online, or wherever. They have done so much for me, and they've done so much for you too. In my job as an investigative journalist over 3 decades, I have attracted a fair few enemies of varying degrees. Some are more obsessively determined to destroy me than others, and they must be handled with firmness and control. Oh, yes, they must. But all of them, no matter how malevolent, have taught me something of importance that has helped me progress both personally and professionally. Of course, they didn't mean to. They meant to destroy me. They meant to silence me. They meant to get me offline. They meant to get me off TV, and they meant to get me out of media. And look how well they've done. Our show is going from strength to strength to strength. It doesn't mean they don't try on a constant basis. This here on YouTube is currently and constantly under attack. So if for one reason or any reason I suddenly disappear from YouTube, you're going to have to find me on Rumble or wherever, and we'll have to build it up from there. But for now, we're still on YouTube, which is absolutely great. So the thing about adversaries is they often know more about us than our loved ones do, because they become so obsessed. They want to know every detail, right? They obsess over every detail. My adversaries, they literally obsess over every detail. They watch everything I do. They take copies of everything I do and so much more. Yes, it's weird. I think they have serious problems, but that's not my fault, even when they may have tried to make it my issue. So what I can do is I can get on with my life and make my life a bigger success than before. And that is what I plan to do, because if my life is a success and what I'm doing here is a success, the aim is that it will benefit humanity. Now, that might sound like a big wish, right? But that is my aim. Simple stuff. I want to leave the world in a better shape than the world that I entered. That's simple, right? It's simple. So the thing is that what I've discovered about our adversaries is that they can help to shape you. They can help to refine you. Certainly, my work has improved as a journalist because I know that if I make a mistake, it will be my adversaries who will pick it up. It won't be my supporters necessarily. My supporters are there and support me, although some supporters will say, oh, you know, you made that error. And as everybody knows with me, if I make an error, I will correct it, right? But the thing is that some people are more impacted by their adversaries than others. But I'm here to tell you, take the good from them, because very few adversaries are in a better position in life than you are. Almost, in fact, all of my adversaries, other than, of course, state adversaries, which is a whole other story, but individual adversaries are not achieving at life. Many of them are unemployed, living in a squalid mess, and envious and jealous of the fact that I'm not. And that's a reality. And that will happen whether you are a media personality or whether you are living your life in a village. If you're getting on and you've got a nice new car, you will attract enemies. You know what it's like. People are jealous and people are envious, but not all. But the point is what can you learn from the experience? And I've learned a whole lot from having adversaries over 30 years. A whole lot. Sometimes it's impacted me dreadfully historically, but now I'm like, I am more than equipped for it, which is why sometimes when we get some tough comments on here, I'll just deal with them quick time because it's easy. It's easy to, because I've dealt with much worse. I've dealt with much worse adversaries than some of our lovely commenters on here. Yes, I have. And the thing is what has happened with me is I've been toughened up without losing who I am. I'm a hugger. Anybody who meets me in real life knows I'm a hugger, and nothing has changed. Not even during C19, I was still hugging people. But they've you know, my adversaries have really helped me hone my skills. You made me a better journalist. Thank you for that. And because no one critiques you like your enemy, which is often funny because here you are, out here working on, you know, how to make it a better world. And you have these parasites out there trying to destroy you for wanting to make it a better world because they are part of a nefarious agenda. That's why I was interested in talking with Dr. David Hughes, about what kind of war we're in. We're in a spiritual war, right? We're in a spiritual war of good versus evil. Okay, good versus evil. So, as I say, I have adversaries in all spheres, on life and in real life, and I just want to use today this final point today to thank them all for making me so much better. And in fact, I cannot think of a better way of summing that up than turning to the wordsmith that is Christina Aguilera and her song Fighter. And this is what she said, and I literally echo every single word. Thank you, my adversaries. This is to you. You have made me much stronger. You make me work a little bit harder. It makes me that much wiser. So thanks for making me a fighter. You've made me learn a little bit faster. You've made my skin a little bit thicker. You make me that much smarter. So thanks for making me a fighter. And on that note, I want to thank you all for being here today, whether you are there in the live chat or whether you're in catch up. Thank you for being here. Thank you to all our tremendous guests, absolutely amazing guests, obviously Gemma Cooper, SUNIL, SHARMA and Dr. David Hughes. Thank you to all of the people who contribute to this show. Thank you to the wonderful people I met on Tuesday. We will have details for the mugs, question the narrative. And that's me, of course. It says wake up there. Thank you all. I truly, truly appreciate you. Have a tremendous weekend. Even my enemies, have a tremendous weekend. And I will see you Monday. Take excellent care of yourself. Love you very much.